Hi guys, tonight you're standing in a place where winter doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives quietly, at first like a breath held too long, then settles its full weight onto the land. The air smells thin and sharp. Snow hasn't even fallen yet, but you can already feel how sound travels differently, how your own breathing seems louder, more deliberate. You pull your coat closer without really thinking about it, and that instinct alone already tells you something important. Out here, survival begins before the cold does. You probably won't survive this, at least not without learning fast. Not because winter is dramatic or cruel in a cinematic way, but because it is patient. It waits for small mistakes, it notices the things you ignore. And the frontiersmen you're about to live among understood that better than anyone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something fitting about sharing a quiet moment across different nights. Now dim the lights and let your awareness move outward again, back into this cold-edged world. You are not arriving with grand plans or heroic confidence. You arrive with tools, simple ones, ordinary ones. The kind that would barely fill a modern kitchen drawer. And yet these objects will decide whether you wake up warm tomorrow or stiff with regret. A widely accepted historical reality is that most frontier survival did not hinge on bravery or strength, but on consistent use of basic equipment. Nothing flashy, nothing optimized, just familiar tools used daily without ceremony. You feel their weight immediately, not heavy in the hands, but heavy with responsibility. Each item you carry has a job, and winter will punish you for forgetting what that job is. There's a strange comfort in that clarity. Modern life doesn't usually work this way. Out here, usefulness is obvious. If something doesn't help you eat, stay dry, stay warm, or stay alive, it slowly disappears from your world. The cold deepens as evening approaches, and you notice how quickly light fades. This is your first quiet lesson. Daylight is a resource now, not a background condition. You begin to understand why frontiersmen measured time differently in winter. Not by clocks, but by what could be finished before dark. Scholars continue to debate how much this seasonal rhythm shaped frontier psychology, but there's no doubt it shaped daily behavior. You already feel it nudging you toward efficiency. Your hands ache slightly, not from labor yet, but from exposure. Skin tightens. Fingertips lose some sensitivity. It's subtle, but unmistakable. You flex your fingers and think about gloves not as accessories, but as tools in their own right. This thought would have seemed excessive a few hours ago. Now it feels obvious. You step inside a rough shelter, and the smell changes instantly. Wood. Smoke that clings faintly to walls. Old fabric. It's not unpleasant, but it is honest. Nothing here pretends to be clean in the modern sense. Instead, everything feels used, tested, familiar with hardship. A mainstream historical understanding tells us that frontier homes were rarely comfortable by design. They were functional spaces first shaped around heat retention and labor efficiency. Comfort was a byproduct, not a goal. Your eyes adjust slowly. There's no overhead light, no switch to flip. Illumination comes from a small, steady flame, barely brighter than necessary. You realize that light itself is rationed here. Too much flame wastes fuel. Too little invites accidents. This balance between enough and too much will follow you through every tool you use. You take inventory without meaning to. A knife resting within reach, a heavy pot near the hearth, a bucket turned upside down, still damp from earlier use. None of these items look impressive, but each one represents a solution to a problem winter will certainly present. A lesser known but fascinating detail from period journals is that many frontiersmen named or personalized their tools not out of sentimentality, but because familiarity reduced mistakes. Knowing exactly how a blade behaved or how a pot heated mattered more than owning the best version. You sit and the wood beneath you creaks softly. Even furniture participates in survival here. Benches are solid, simple, easy to repair. Nothing collapses unexpectedly. Nothing wastes space. You notice how close everything feels, not cramped exactly, just efficient. Movement is minimized, steps are counted, energy is conserved long before hunger demands it. Outside, wind brushes against the structure, testing seams, probing for weaknesses. This is another quiet truth. Winter is interactive. It doesn't just exist around you, it presses inward, asking questions. Are you sealed well enough? Are your tools ready? Are you paying attention? Historians still argue whether frontier resilience came more from preparation or adaptability. But in moments like this, the difference feels irrelevant. You need both. Your body begins to relax as the fire steadies. Heat radiates unevenly, warming one side more than the other. You shift instinctively, learning how to position yourself without conscious thought. This learning is physical. No instruction manual, no lecture, just sensation and correction. You think briefly about how modern survival narratives often focus on dramatic extremes, blizzards, starvation, perilous journeys. But the reality you're stepping into is quieter. Survival here is repetitive. It's about doing small things correctly, over and over, until they become habits. A quirky but revealing anecdote from frontier accounts notes that some settlers feared boredom more than cold because boredom led to carelessness. Carelessness in winter was expensive. As night fully settles, you feel the world narrow. Your concerns shrink to what's within arm's reach. Tools stop being objects and start becoming extensions of intention. The knife is not a weapon, it is preparation. The pot is not cookware, it is tomorrow's warmth. The bucket is not a container, it is time saved later. You exhale slowly, and for the first time the cold feels manageable, not conquered, just acknowledged. You understand now that the season ahead won't be survived through force, but through attention. And the tools around you are not symbols of hardship. They are agreements. Promises that if you use them well, winter might let you pass without too much cost. The fire murmurs softly, steady and contained. Outside, the wind moves on, unsatisfied for now. You sit with your tools, letting their quiet presence teach you what to expect next. You wake without an alarm, not because you are rested, but because the cold has shifted. It doesn't bite yet, it nudges. The kind of quiet reminder that tells you the fire has weakened and the night has taken something with it. You move slowly, testing joints, noticing how stiffness fades once you flex your fingers. The knife is still where you left it. That matters more than you expected. You reach for it without ceremony. No dramatic pause, no sense of danger, just habit beginning to form. On the frontier, a blade was less a tool and more a constant presence. A broadly accepted historical fact is that nearly every frontiersman, regardless of region or trade, carried a personal knife daily. Not a weapon in the heroic sense, but an all-purpose answer to problems that refuse to wait, too. You feel its weight settle into your palm, familiar already. The handle has worn slightly smooth, where fingers naturally rest. That wear is information. It tells you how the knife wants to be held, how it behaves when cold tightens your grip. Modern people often underestimate how much trust develops between hand and tool. Out here, trust saves energy. It saves time. Sometimes it saves skin. You crouch near the hearth and use the blade to shave thin curls from a piece of dry wood. The sound is soft, almost soothing. Curl, curl, curl. The smell of fresh-cut wood rises gently sharper than the smoke. This small act feels almost meditative, and that's no accident. Many winter routines doubled as mental anchors. A curious detail from period diaries mentions that some settlers preferred certain knives, not because they were sharper, but because the sound they made while cutting felt right. Familiar sound meant predictable results. The fire responds quickly. Sparks catch, flame strengthens, warmth creeps back into the room, and you realize how closely your comfort is tied to this single piece of steel. Without it, fire starting becomes slower. Food prep becomes clumsy. Repairs wait longer than they should. The knife shortens effort. That efficiency adds up over days, then weeks. You turn the blade sideways and scrape ice from a bucket rim. The motion is controlled, careful. A chipped edge would be costly. Sharpening stones exist, but time spent fixing mistakes is time not spent warming, eating or resting. Historians still debate whether frontier knives were intentionally kept slightly duller for safety, but many accounts suggest the real priority was consistency. A blade that behaved predictably beat one that demanded constant attention. As the day begins, the knife stays with you. It opens sacks, cuts cord, trims leather, scrapes mud from boots. Each task is small, almost forgettable. That's the point. Survival here is built from forgettable actions done correctly. You begin to understand why losing a knife was described in some letters with the same gravity as losing livestock. Replacement wasn't guaranteed. Familiarity couldn't be rushed. There's a quieter lesson unfolding too. Carrying the knife changes how you move. You're more deliberate, less wasteful. You don't force materials to behave, you persuade them. Wood splits where it wants to split. Rope parts cleanly instead of fraying. Even food tastes better when it's cut properly, though hunger would make you eat it anyway. You sit briefly to eat knife resting nearby. It never leaves reach. This isn't paranoia, it's rhythm. Frontier life trained people to keep essential tools within arm's length, especially in winter, when getting up meant losing heat. A well-documented pattern shows that many accidents occurred during unnecessary movement. Standing too often, searching too long, reaching without thinking. Outside, light reflects off snow patches bright enough to sting your eyes. You squint grateful. The knife can double as a scraper again, clearing frost from a small window opening. The blade works patiently, edge angled, just right. You think about how many modern tools do one job well and nothing else. This knife does many jobs adequately, and that versatility is its strength. There's a fringe but intriguing claim found in some regional folklore that certain knives were believed to know their owners performing better for familiar hands. While that idea leans towards superstition, scholars still argue whether such beliefs improved outcomes simply by encouraging careful, attentive use. Belief shapes behavior. Behavior shapes survival. You check the blade edge with your thumb lightly respectfully. No blood. Good, you wipe it clean and slip it back into place. The motion feels natural now, practiced. Already you're less likely to set it down somewhere foolish. Already you're thinking ahead. As the day stretches on, fatigue arrives quietly. Not exhaustion, just the steady cost of cold. The knife helps here too, reducing strain. You don't wrestle materials, you guide them. That difference preserves energy in ways you can feel by afternoon. You pause listening to the faint sounds of the shelter, settling the wind shifting direction. The knife rests against you warm from proximity. It's strange how something so simple becomes reassuring. Not because it promises defense, but because it promises competence. You can respond, you can adjust. Night approaches again, slower this time, less threatening. You prepare without urgency. Food is cut cleanly. Kindling is shaved. Small repairs are handled before they grow teeth. The knife moves through these tasks like punctuation marking progress without calling attention to itself. You lie back eventually, fire steady blade nearby. The cold hasn't gone anywhere. It never will. But you feel less like a guest now and more like a participant. This simple tool has taught you that survival isn't about dominating the environment. It's about meeting it with readiness, over and over, until readiness feels like rest. Morning brings a different kind of cold, sharper, more honest, the kind that doesn't pretend it might warm up later. You feel it in your shoulders first, then in your lower back as you step outside. Snow has fallen overnight, not dramatically, just enough to soften edges and muffle sound. The world feels padded, quieter than yesterday. Your breath hangs in front of you, slow and visible, like proof that you're still part of the landscape. The axe waits where it was left, leaned carefully against a log. You notice its weight before you lift it. Not heavy, in an overwhelming way, but serious. This is not a tool you swing casually. A well-established historical fact is that axes were among the most essential possessions on the frontier, often valued more highly than firearms. Firewood was warmth cooking, light and morale. Without it, winter shortened lives quickly. You grip the handle and feel the smoothness earned by years of hands before yours. Axe handles were rarely decorative. They were shaped to reduce blistering, to guide the swing, to forgive imperfect angles. You step into position and let the axe fall, not forcing it, trusting gravity and momentum. The sound is solid. Wood answers cleanly. There's satisfaction in that sound deeper than accomplishment. It means efficiency. You work slowly, not because you're weak, but because haste wastes energy. Each swing is measured, each breath timed. Frontier manuals often advise chopping just enough wood for immediate needs, not stockpiling excessively in extreme cold. Historians still argue whether this advice was about conserving energy or preventing injury from overexertion. But standing here axe in hand, you understand both reasons at once. The rhythm settles in. Lift, swing, split. The axe becomes an extension of your arms, guiding motion rather than demanding strength. There's a curious fringe belief recorded in some Appalachian settlements that axes had good days and bad days, depending on weather and wood grain. While this sounds whimsical, modern scholars suggest it reflects an intuitive understanding of how temperature affects materials and muscles. Your hands warm despite the cold, not from heat, but from circulation. This matters. Standing still too long invites stiffness. Working too hard invites sweat. Sweat invites danger. You pause frequently, leaning on the axe, listening to the quiet. Snow absorbs sound so completely, it feels like the world is holding its breath. You stack the split wood carefully. Order matters. Pieces that dry faster go on top. Heavier logs anchor the base. This isn't just neatness. A mainstream observation from frontier households shows that poorly stacked wood absorbed moisture and froze together, turning tomorrow's fuel into tomorrow's frustration. Every small choice echoes forward. The axe isn't just for splitting. You use its back to pound, stakes its blade to trim rough edges, its weight to test stability. Versatility matters again. Tools that could perform multiple roles reduced the number of objects you needed to manage and the mental load that came with them. Winter demanded simplicity. Your shoulders ache now, but it's a clean ache. The kind that promises rest will work. You set the axe down, deliberately, blade turned inward, handle angled away from where someone might trip. Accidents happened often with axes, especially when fatigue dulled awareness. Period records note that winter injuries frequently occurred not during storms, but during routine tasks done carelessly. You step back inside and feel the contrast immediately. The shelter seems warmer now, not because the temperature changed dramatically, but because you earned the warmth. The fire responds eagerly to the new wood flame, brightening sound, deepening. The axe did that. It turned effort into comfort. You sit and let your breathing slow. The axe rests nearby, no longer demanding attention. There's something grounding about its presence. It represents labor, completed, security, extended. You think about how modern heating systems hide their labor far away. Out here, warmth is personal. You feel every step between forest and fire. A quirky detail from Frontier Letters mentions that some families decorated axe handles with small carvings or notches, not as art, but as markers of seasons past. Each winter left its record in wood, time measured by effort, not calendars. You eat slowly. Appetite sharpened by work, food tastes fuller, more deserved. You notice how tools shape emotion as much as outcome. The axe doesn't just provide heat, it provides reassurance. You know you can repeat this process tomorrow and the day after. That predictability calms the mind. Outside, the wind picks up, slightly pushing snow into soft drifts. You watch it for a moment, noticing how it interacts with stacked wood, how placement matters. You adjust a piece or two, small corrections now, preventing larger problems later. This is another quiet lesson. Winter rewards anticipation. As evening approaches, fatigue settles deeper. You clean the axe head, wiping moisture away, checking for chips. Maintenance isn't optional. A damaged tool becomes a liability. Frontier wisdom often emphasized tool care as daily ritual, not occasional chore. Historians still debate whether this diligence came from necessity or cultural habit, but the result was the same: tools lasted longer, injuries decreased. You lean the axe back in its place, exactly where your hand expects it to be tomorrow. That expectation is comfort. Familiarity reduces cognitive strain. When everything around you is challenging, reducing decisions matters. Night comes gently this time. The fire holds, the wood stack waits, the axe rests. Your body relaxes into the bench muscles, heavy but cooperative. You feel the satisfaction of honest weight, of having matched effort to need without excess. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the fire's steady conversation. The axe has taught you something important today. Survival isn't about fighting winter. It's about working with it, one controlled swing at a time. The fire greets you before the day does. Not with warmth exactly, but with presence. A low glow, barely awake, breathing quietly beneath ash. You kneel close and feel the difference between a fire that has survived the night and one that hasn't. This one still remembers you. That matters. You reach for the small pouch kept near the hearth. Inside are things so unimpressive they'd be laughed out of a modern camping store. A piece of flint, a bit of steel, a scrap of charred cloth folded thin as a leaf. Yet records from across frontier settlements consistently note that dependable fire-starting methods ranked among the most prized possessions during winter months. Fire wasn't convenience, it was continuity. You strike carefully, not hard. Hard wastes effort. The spark jumps brief and bright, then disappears. Again. On the third strike, the char takes it glowing like a tiny heartbeat. You cup it gently, feed it breath, and the ember grows. This moment never feels rushed. It shouldn't. Fire demands patience, and impatience is how fingers get burned or mornings get ruined. There's a faint smell as the ember wakes, dry, slightly sweet, unmistakable. You place it into waiting tinder and coax flame forward. This ritual happens every morning, and it never becomes boring. Familiar, yes. Predictable mostly, but never boring. People living through long winters often wrote about fire as if it were alive, not because they were romantic, but because attention kept it alive. Neglect did not. Some lesser-known frontier accounts describe families keeping multiple fire-starting kits in different parts of the home. Not redundancy for paranoia's sake, but insurance against fatigue. If one kit went missing or damp, another waited. Scholars still debate whether this habit came from past trauma or learned caution, but either way, it saved time and sometimes lives. The flame strengthens and the room responds. Cold retreats, reluctantly pooling near the floor. The soundscape shifts too. Wood begins its gentle commentary. The structure loosens its nighttime stiffness. You straighten slowly, feeling warmth seep into hands that had gone numb without complaint. You think briefly about matches. They exist now, but they are unreliable. Damp air spoils them. Rough handling ruins them. A spark struck by hand offers control. Control is calming. Fire-starting tools taught people to work with conditions, not against them. That mindset runs deeper than technique. As the fire grows, you feed it carefully shaved kindling, each piece placed with intention. Too much smothers, too little wastes heat. This balance echoes everywhere in winter life. A practical observation drawn from homestead journals shows that overfeeding fires often led to overheating sweat and later chills. Moderation kept bodies dry, dry kept bodies alive. You sit back and listen. There's a rhythm now. Crackle, pause, settle. Fire sounds different when it's healthy. You learn that without instruction. Sound becomes feedback. Frontier children learned this early too often, before they could read. They knew when to add wood by ear. A curious regional belief once held that fire lit before sunrise behaved better throughout the day. While modern explanations point to humidity and temperature differences, many settlers swore by the habit. Belief or not, it encouraged early rising and preparedness, both valuable traits in winter. The tools returned to their place, wiped clean, tucked dry. Moisture ruins sparks. You remember that. You always remember that now. The cold doesn't forgive forgetfulness. With the fire steady, you prepare food. Heat makes everything possible. Without it, water stays locked in ice. Meals shrink to hard, joyless things. Fire unlocks nourishment, morale, and movement. It's not dramatic, but it's decisive. As daylight grows, you notice how the fire's position influences the room. Shadows stretch and retreat. You shift a pot slightly, avoiding direct flame. Too much heat spoils food. Too little prolongs cooking and drains fuel. A well-documented truth from frontier kitchens is that cooking was often done at the edge of the fire, not in it. Precision mattered more than speed. You warm your hands briefly, then pull them away. Lingering invites stiffness later. This restraint is learned quickly. The fire is not a place to linger aimlessly. It's a tool like any other offering benefit when used correctly. Outside, the wind hums low. Inside, the fire answers softly. The two exist in constant negotiation. You understand now why fire starting was treated as skill, not luck. Skill brings calm. Luck brings anxiety. There's a faint satisfaction in knowing you can wake warmth from nothing more than stone and steel. No switches, no fuel deliveries, just practiced motion. That knowledge settles into you quiet and reassuring. Some modern observers romanticize this process, imagining drama in every spark. The reality is calmer. It's routine. And routine is what carries people through long, dark stretches. You finish eating, clean up slowly, and tend the fire one last time before stepping outside. The flame holds steady and obedient. You don't thank it. Gratitude here is shown through care. As you move into the day, the cold feels less intrusive. Not weaker, just familiar. You carry the confidence of someone who knows they can bring warmth back whenever needed. That confidence isn't loud, it doesn't show, but it steadies your steps. Fire starting tools don't demand attention once mastered. They quietly expand your margin for error. And in winter, margin is everything. You glance back once before closing the door just to confirm the glow remains. It does. Of course it does. You prepared well. The pot is already waiting for you exactly where you left it, heavy and unbothered by the cold. You feel its presence before you touch it, a quiet promise of order in a season that rarely offers comfort freely. Iron holds temperature, the way winter holds grudges, slowly, thoroughly, without drama. You wrap your fingers around the rim and feel yesterday's warmth still lingering, faint but real. Cooking begins long before hunger announces itself. That's something frontier families learned early. A broadly recognized historical understanding is that meals in winter were planned hours ahead, not minutes, because fire, fuel and daylight had to cooperate. You don't cook because you're hungry. You cook because later, when hunger arrives, you may not have the energy or light to respond. You fill the pot carefully. Water first chipped loose from ice and allowed to soften near the fire. Then dried vegetables, a bit of salted meat, nothing wasted, nothing rushed. The pot settles into place with a dull sound that feels grounding. Thin cookware would warp or scorch. This one absorbs heat, patiently distributing it evenly, forgiving small mistakes. As the fire licks the bottom, the pot answers with subtle changes. Tiny sounds, a shift in smell. You learn to read these signals without trying. A faint hiss means too much heat. Silence means not enough. Somewhere between is steady progress. Frontier cooks rarely use precise measurements, yet outcomes were remarkably consistent. Scholars still debate whether this consistency came from experience alone or from sensory cues refined through necessity. You stir slowly, not to hurry the process, but to keep ingredients from settling unfairly. This motion becomes part of the day's rhythm. Stir, pause, listen. Outside, the wind scratches lightly at the structure. Inside, the pot breathes warmth into the room. There's an old anecdote recorded in settlement letters about a family that replaced their cracked iron pot with a lighter tin one, believing it more modern. That winter, they burned through fuel twice as fast and still ate poorly heated meals. They switched back before spring. It's a small story, but it reveals a deeper truth. Efficiency isn't always about innovation. Sometimes it's about mass and patience. You move the pot slightly, just enough to avoid direct flame. Cooking here is about edge heat, not intensity. Too much fire wastes fuel and scorches food. Too little draws the process out and tempts impatience. A commonly cited observation from frontier kitchens notes that successful winter cooking was as much about restraint as skill. As steam begins to rise, the room fills with a scent that feels heavier than air. It carries memory with it, meals, shared bodies, warming, time slowing. You sit nearby, not hovering, just present. This waiting is productive. It keeps you close to warmth without demanding motion. You think briefly about how modern cooking often prioritizes speed. Quick meals, high heat, instant results. Here speed is suspicious. It suggests waste or risk. Slow cooking aligns with the body's needs in cold weather. Food that releases energy gradually keeps you warm longer through the night. This understanding didn't require nutrition charts. It was learned through mornings that felt easier after the right meal. A lesser-known practice in some regions involved leaving the pot near the fire overnight, wrapped carefully, allowing food to stay warm enough to avoid freezing, but not hot enough to spoil. While historians still argue about the safety of this method, accounts suggest it was used sparingly and with close attention to temperature and smell. Again, attention mattered more than technique. You taste cautiously. Not because it's dangerous, but because you respect the process. The flavor is simple, honest. It doesn't excite. It sustains, and that's enough. You add a pinch of salt, not for indulgence, but for balance. Salt mattered in winter, not just for preservation, but for maintaining strength. Too little invited weakness. Too much wasted a precious resource. You eat slowly, spoon, scraping softly against iron. The sound is familiar, comforting. Eating too fast cools the body faster too, another subtlety learned over time. Warm food does its best work when it arrives gradually. After the meal, you don't rush to clean. The pot stays near the fire, residual heat easing the task. You add water, let it warm, and wipe it clean. No soap, just care. A damaged pot would crack under stress, and replacements were uncertain at best. Maintaining cookware was survival maintenance, not housekeeping. You lift the pot to set it aside, feeling its weight again. It anchors you. There's something reassuring about objects that don't pretend to be light. They don't ask you to hurry, they ask you to plan. Outside, daylight is already leaning toward afternoon. You realize how seamlessly cooking has merged with the passage of time. The pot didn't just prepare food, it structured your morning. It kept you near heat, discouraged wandering, and rewarded patience. That's good design, even if no one called it that. Some frontier families passed pots down through generations, repairing cracks with crude metalwork or wire. The pot carried stories in its scars. Each repair marked a winter survived. This continuity mattered. It reminded people that tools outlasted seasons and sometimes people. As the day continues, the pot waits quietly. It may be used again later, or it may rest until morning. Either way, it's ready. You've learned to keep it that way. The cold hasn't lessened. The wind still moves with intent. But inside, warmth holds steady, supported by iron fire and time. You lean back satisfied, not full in a modern sense, but balanced. You understand now that survival doesn't always look like struggle. Sometimes it looks like a pot simmering patiently while the world outside does what it will. Water announces its importance quietly, usually after it's already become a problem. You realize this the moment you step outside and see the bucket rim glazed with ice, thin but stubborn. Overnight, the temperature dipped just enough to remind you that water here is never passive. It must be managed, anticipated, respected. You tap the bucket lightly, listening to the sound it makes. Solid means frozen too deep. Hollow means salvageable. This one answers kindly. You break the ice with controlled pressure, not force. Shattering wastes water. Spilled water becomes ice. Ice becomes work you didn't plan for. Frontier routines treated water handling as a daily discipline, not a background chore. Many household accounts emphasize that people thought about tomorrow's water needs the night before, especially in prolonged cold. You lift the bucket carefully. It's heavier than it looks, not because it's full, but because cold stiffens everything, including your own movements. You carry it close to your body, sharing warmth instinctively. This habit wasn't sentimental, it was efficient. Water carried away from the body froze faster. Small adjustments mattered. Inside, you set the bucket near the fire, not too close. Direct heat cracks wood and warps stuffules. Too far away, and the ice refuses to loosen. This balance again. Everything in winter seems to ask for balance. You cover the bucket loosely, keeping ash and debris out while allowing heat to circulate. A commonly recognized fact drawn from frontier homesteads is that buckets and barrels were often made of wood rather than metal during winter months. Wood insulated better and resisted freezing longer. Metal conducted cold too efficiently. This choice wasn't aesthetic. It was practical engineering, learned through frozen mornings and split seams. As the ice softens, you think about how water shapes your schedule. You don't drink whenever you're thirsty. You drink when water is accessible. You wash when water is liquid. You plan tasks around thaw cycles. Time bends around this necessity. Historians still argue whether this constant planning sharpened frontier problem-solving skills or simply exhausted people into compliance, but either way, it structured daily life. You pour a portion into a smaller container for immediate use, leaving the rest to continue warming. Spills are wiped immediately. Wet floors steal heat. Dampness invites chill. These are not dramatic dangers, they are quiet ones. Winter specializes in quiet. There's a peculiar note in some settlement records describing families who added small amounts of salt or ash to water storage during extreme cold. The method wasn't universal, and its effectiveness varied, but the intention was clear: prevent complete freezing. Scholars still debate how widespread or successful this practice truly was, yet it reflects a mindset of experimentation born from necessity. You wash your hands briefly, quickly, then dry them thoroughly. Lingering invites numbness. Soap is used sparingly. Cleanliness matters, but so does heat retention. Frontier hygiene balanced health against exposure risk. Too much washing in winter led to cracked skin and infections. Too little led to illness. Again, moderation. The barrel in the corner draws your attention. Larger storage, heavier responsibility. You check its lid, ensuring it's secure but not sealed tight. Pressure changes crack containers. You've learned that lesson already. You place a cloth over the top, not to keep warmth in, but to keep debris out while allowing the barrel to breathe. A lesser known but telling detail from winter diaries mentions that children were often tasked with monitoring water levels, not hauling full loads. This taught awareness without overexertion. Watching water taught patience. Carrying water taught care. Both mattered. You step back outside to refill the bucket later in the day, timing it with the warmest light. Sun matters. Even weak winter sun slows freezing just enough to make work easier. You angle the bucket to catch that advantage. These small optimizations accumulate. By evening, they mean less fatigue. The path to the water source is already worn, packed down by repeated use. This isn't laziness, it's energy conservation. Trudging through fresh snow drains strength faster than people realize. Reuse paths, reuse routines. Winter rewards repetition. As you lower the bucket, you listen again. Water moves differently when cold, sluggish, thick. You fill slowly to avoid splashing. The surface ripples reluctantly. You lift and turn back, mindful of footing. A fall here wouldn't be dramatic, just costly. Wet clothes, lost heat, delayed tasks. Consequences cascade quietly. Back inside the bucket joins its companions. They wait. Water waits. It doesn't rush you, but it doesn't forgive neglect either. You've already adjusted your thinking. You don't assume availability anymore. You ensure it. There's a faint satisfaction in knowing where your water is, how much you have, how long it will last before freezing again. This awareness reduces anxiety. You don't wonder, you know that knowledge settles the mind. Some modern interpretations frame frontier life as constantly precarious. The reality feels more controlled than that. Yes, risks existed, but routines reduced them. Water management is one of the clearest examples. Handled daily thoughtfully, it becomes predictable. As evening approaches, you move the bucket slightly closer to the fire again, preparing for night. Not too close, just enough. You've learned that exact placement through small corrections, not instruction. Trial without error is rare. Winter teaches through gentle penalties at first. You cover containers, check lids, wipe drips. These motions are unremarkable, almost boring. That boredom is safety. Nothing is urgent. Nothing is wrong. You sit back listening to the faint crackle of ice shifting as it melts. It's a quiet sound, almost comforting. It means you planned well. The cold remains outside, pressing, waiting. Inside, water rests, managed, obedient. You've learned another essential truth. Survival isn't about conquering nature. It's about keeping essentials in a usable state, one careful day at a time. Light doesn't arrive all at once anymore. It thins, stretches, and fades in stages, like it's negotiating with the cold before giving up. You notice this more each day. Winter teaches you to watch light the way sailors watch tides. When it goes, it takes options with it. You reach for the lantern before you truly need it. That's another lesson learned quickly. Waiting until dark makes everything feel rushed. The lantern's glass is cool to the touch, slightly clouded from years of use. You check the wick, trim it just enough, and refill the oil carefully. Spills are wiped immediately. Oil wasted now is darkness later. A well-established observation from frontier households is that lanterns replaced open flames indoors as soon as materials allowed. Candles and hearth lights had their place, but lanterns offered control. They moved where you moved. They reduced accidental fires. In winter, when doors stayed closed and air barely circulated, that mattered. You light the wick and adjust it slowly. Too high and soot blackens the glass, dimming light and wasting fuel. Too low and shadows grow long and misleading. Lantern light isn't meant to banish darkness, it's meant to shape it. You place the lantern where it casts light downward, not outward. The floor matters. Tools left unseen become hazards. The room changes instantly. Not brighter, just more defined. Edges appear. Surfaces declare themselves. You can work now without strain. That's the real gift of light-reducing effort. Eyes that squint burn energy. Clear vision preserves it. There's a subtle warmth near the lantern, too barely noticeable, but welcome. In some settlements, people clustered lanterns near hands during fine work, not for heat exactly, but to keep fingers responsive. Scholars still debate how much heat lanterns actually contributed, but no one disputes their psychological comfort. Light reassures, darkness asks questions. You carry the lantern with you as you move, keeping it low. High light casts deceptive shadows, low light reveals obstacles honestly. This practice appears frequently in winter travel notes, especially from those moving between outbuildings at night. Falls were common, broken bones were catastrophic, lantern placement mattered. A curious fringe habit recorded in certain regions involved turning lanterns slightly toward walls rather than open space. The reflected light softened glare and reduced eye fatigue. While this might sound trivial, small reductions in strain added up over long nights. You sit to mend something, perhaps a strap, perhaps a tear you noticed earlier. The lantern rests nearby, steady, unbothered. Its flame hums softly, a sound you've come to recognize as healthy. Flickering means draft. Sputtering means low fuel. Silence paired with steady glow means all is well. Outside, wind picks up again, brushing snow against the structure. The lantern doesn't waver. That stability feels earned. You've sealed gaps. You've learned where drafts creep in. Winter tests structures gently, at first escalating only when ignored. You think about how modern lighting erases darkness completely, floods it, overpowers it. Here light negotiates, it shares space, that changes how you move. You're slower, more deliberate. You don't rush because rushing creates shadows you can't read in time. Some frontier families reportedly turned lanterns down, lower than necessary, in the evenings, not to save oil alone, but to encourage earlier rest. Sleep conserved, fuel warmth and morale. Historians still argue whether this habit shortened productive hours or extended survival, but the logic feels sound. Darkness becomes a cue, not an enemy. You adjust the wick once more, just a fraction. The glass stays clear. Good. You make a mental note to clean it tomorrow anyway. Soot accumulates invisibly at first. Like many winter problems, it announces itself late. As the night deepens, the lantern becomes the room's heartbeat. Everything arranges itself around its reach. Tools within the light feel usable. Tools outside it might as well not exist. This boundary simplifies decisions. You work where light allows. You stop when it doesn't. You finish your task and sit back, lantern between your feet, warming the space, just enough to be noticed. The flame's reflection trembles faintly on the walls, slow and hypnotic. It's easy to see why people found comfort in this glow. It doesn't demand attention, it invites it. Eventually you prepare to sleep. The lantern is turned low, not extinguished yet. Some families kept a low flame through the night, ready for emergencies. Others trusted embers alone. Practices varied by fuel availability and risk tolerance. There was no single right way, only informed choices. You decide and act without second guessing. That confidence is new. It comes from repetition, from understanding cause and effect. Lantern light has taught you that winter survival is not about seeing everything. It's about seeing enough. You turn the flame down further, then out. Darkness returns, but it's familiar now. Not threatening, just present. You lie back knowing that when light is needed again, you can call it back with a practiced hand. And that knowledge lets you rest more deeply than brightness ever could. Your fingers notice damage before your eyes do. A faint draft along the wrist. A tug where fabric no longer holds tension. Winter has a way of finding the smallest failures, then returning to them patiently until they grow. You don't curse when you spot the tear. You simply reach for the sewing kit. It is modest. A roll of needles wrapped in cloth, a few spools of thread in muted colours, a scrap of beeswax, nothing ornate. Yet domestic records from frontier households repeatedly show that needlework ranked among the most essential winter skills, practiced by nearly everyone, not only those traditionally assigned the task. Clothing failed constantly. Repair kept people alive. You warm your hands first. Cold fingers fumble. Fumbling bends needles and snaps thread. You hold your palms near the fire, just long enough to feel responsiveness return. This preparation matters. A small pause now prevents frustration later. You thread the needle carefully, tongue pressed lightly against lip without thinking. Some habits cross centuries unchanged. The thread slides through after a second try. You draw it through the wax, stiffening it slightly, protecting it from moisture. That detail appears again and again in winter journals. Waxed thread resisted fraying and absorbed less damp, which meant seams lasted longer in snow and sleet. You turn the garment inside out, studying the tear. It isn't dramatic, just a seam that has given up under repeated strain. That's how most failures happen. Not catastrophically, but quietly. You align the edges, pinch them together, and begin. The motion is small and precise. In, out, pull, not tight. Tight breaks thread, just firm enough to hold. You work slowly, not because speed is impossible, but because accuracy matters more. A sloppy stitch invites wind. Wind invites cold. Cold invites mistakes tomorrow. A widely accepted historical observation is that winter clothing was rarely replaced during the cold months. New garments required time, material, and energy. Repair extended usefulness, and usefulness mattered more than appearance. Frontier aesthetics valued intact seams over symmetry. You pause occasionally, flexing fingers, keeping circulation active. Stillness chills, motion warms, even fine work followed that rule. You notice how quiet the room has become. Sewing absorbs sound. It narrows attention. Many people described it as calming, though they wouldn't have used that word. It was simply necessary. There's a curious note in some letters describing how certain families preferred slightly uneven stitching, believing it stretched better under strain. While modern textile experts might question that logic, scholars still debate whether irregular stitches distributed stress more forgivingly than perfectly uniform ones when fabric stiffened in cold. You finish the seam and run your fingers along it, eyes closed. Touch tells you what sight cannot. The seam feels smooth, continuous, no gaps. Good. You tie off the thread, carefully trimming excess with the ever-present knife. Nothing wasted, short scraps are saved, they always are. You turn the garment right side out and hold it up. The repair is nearly invisible, but that's not the goal. The goal is silence. No drafts, no flapping, no catching. Clothing should disappear once it's on. If you notice it, something is wrong. You set the garment aside near the fire, not to dry, but to relax fibers. Cold makes cloth rigid. Gentle warmth restores flexibility. This small step appears often in winter care routines, though rarely explained. People did it because it worked. Your attention shifts to socks. They wear fastest. Feet move constantly. Moisture accumulates. A mainstream understanding from Frontier Medical Notes shows that foot injuries sidelined more people than storms or accidents. Keeping socks intact mattered more than people expected. You inspect heels and toes, reinforcing thin spots before holes appear. Prevention feels satisfying. You imagine tomorrow's walk feeling just a little warmer because of these stitches. That imagined comfort is real enough to motivate care now. There's a rhythm to this work that pairs well with evening. The fire settles. The light steadies. Outside, the wind loses interest. Sewing fits into that lull naturally. It keeps hands busy without demanding strain. It produces something tangible from time that might otherwise feel wasted. A lesser-known habit described in some homesteads involved storing needles in small pieces of cork or dried gourd to prevent rust. Moisture was relentless. Metal suffered quietly. Protecting needles meant protecting future repairs. Tools that failed during winter were often impossible to replace until spring. You return the needle to its place, carefully checking that none are missing. A lost needle in straw bedding was no small hazard. People remembered injuries for years. Attention prevented accidents. As you tidy the kit, you feel a quiet competence settle in. This isn't dramatic survival, it's maintenance. And maintenance done regularly transforms winter from an adversary into a condition. Historians still argue whether the constant repair culture of frontier life fostered resilience or merely necessity. Sitting here, thread warm between fingers, the distinction feels academic. The result is the same. You are warmer, you are prepared. You slip the mended garment on briefly, just to test it. The draft is gone. The fabric moves with you instead of against you. You nod once satisfied. No celebration, just confirmation. The sewing kit returns to its shelf within reach, but out of the way. It will be used again soon. Winter guarantees that. You lean back, letting your hands rest. They ache slightly, but it's a gentle ache, the kind that promises usefulness tomorrow. The fire's glow softens lantern light, narrowing the room again. You realize something quietly important. Survival here isn't about reacting to emergencies. It's about reducing how often emergencies appear. Every stitch you place tonight was a problem that will not wake you later. You breathe out slowly, shoulders dropping. Outside, the cold presses on, methodical as ever. Inside, seams hold. Warmth stays where it belongs. And for now, that is enough. You notice your feet before anything else. Not because they hurt yet, but because winter teaches you to check them early, before discomfort escalates into consequence. The floor is cold even near the fire, and you shift your weight slightly, testing sensation. Everything responds. That's good. You reach for the small collection of tools, kept low and close where foot care belongs. Boots on the frontier were not fashion statements. They were systems. A well-supported historical understanding, drawn from winter travel records, shows that foot injuries removed more people from productive work than illness or weather events combined. Once feet failed, everything else followed. Travel stopped. Chores slowed. Recovery took time that winter did not offer generously. You sit and pull a boot closer, inspecting it with calm attention. Leather stiffens in cold, seams dry. Soles separate quietly. You flex the boot by hand, listening. Leather speaks when it's unhappy. A faint creak tells you it needs oil. Silence means it's still cooperative. You reach for a small tin, rendered fat, mixed with oil, saved carefully for this purpose. You warm it slightly, near the fire, just enough to soften it. Cold oil sits on the surface. Warm oil penetrates. This practice appears repeatedly in winter care notes, even though the exact mixtures varied widely by region. What mattered was consistency. You rub the oil into the leather, slowly, thumbs pressing into creases. The boot darkens slightly as it absorbs the treatment. This isn't cosmetic. Conditioned leather repels moisture longer and flexes without cracking. Cracked leather invites water. Water freezes. Frozen boots become liabilities. There's an oddly calming quality to this work. Circular motion, steady pressure, the smell of leather warming faintly. You imagine how many evenings like this have passed before you boots tended, while storms gathered outside. Some settlers described this routine as reassuring a signal that they were still ahead of winter rather than reacting to it. You check the stitching next, running a finger along the seam. One thread looks worn, not broken yet. You could ignore it, but you don't. Preventative repair costs less than emergency repair, especially when hands are cold and light is failing. Historians still argue whether frontier efficiency came more from foresight or from learning hard lessons, but here foresight feels obvious. You reinforce the seam with a few careful stitches, leather needle sliding through with practiced resistance. The leather is tougher than fabric, but predictable. You pull the thread snug, not tight. Tight cuts leather, snug holds. The soles get attention too. You check for uneven wear pressing along the edge. A loose section is addressed, immediately secured before it grows. A curious detail from some frontier accounts mentions people adding thin layers of bark or cloth inside boots during extreme cold. While not ideal long-term, it added insulation when materials were scarce. Scholars still debate how effective this truly was, but desperation often breeds ingenuity. You turn to socks next. They matter more than boots, really. Wool holds warmth, even when damp. Cotton does not forgive mistakes. A widely recognized pattern from medical observations of the period notes that wool-socked feet suffered fewer cold injuries even under similar exposure. You examine heels and toes again, darning thin spots before holes announce themselves at the worst moment. Once everything is ready, you place the boots near, but not too near the fire. Direct heat dries leather too quickly, making it brittle. Indirect warmth preserves flexibility. This placement becomes second nature. You don't think about it anymore. Your body remembers. You stretch your feet slowly, flexing toes, encouraging circulation. Stillness chills extremities faster than any wind. Even at rest, small movements matter. You tuck dry socks nearby, ready for morning. Changing socks before sleep was a common winter practice, not luxury. Dry feet slept warmer. Warm feet rested better. A lesser-known habit in some regions involves storing boots upside down overnight to prevent moisture settling in the toe. Simple gravity, simple physics, small advantages accumulated into survival. You stand briefly testing balance. Everything feels solid, secure. That confidence travels upward through the body. When feet are cared for, posture improves, movement feels easier. You didn't realize how much tension you were carrying until it loosened. Outside, snow creaks faintly as temperature shifts again. Inside your boots, wait prepared. You think about how modern footwear often hides its failures until it's too late. Here everything is visible, inspectable. Responsibility stays close. You sit back down satisfied. No drama, no triumph, just readiness. The tools involved were modest needle thread oil hands. But the outcome is significant. Tomorrow you'll move freely. That matters. You breathe slowly, letting the fire's warmth rise. Your feet are dry, your boots are sound. Winter can press all it wants. You've addressed one of its favourite weaknesses. And with that small victory, you let the evening settle a little deeper. Food does not always announce itself when winter settles in. Sometimes it simply fails to appear. You learn this not through panic, but through quiet calculation. The stores you prepared earlier still matter, but variety fades, portions shrink, and appetite sharpens with cold. That's when the small traps come back into focus. You gather them carefully, checking each one by feel as much as sight. Simple mechanisms. Springs made from bent wire. Deadfalls balanced with stones. Nothing elaborate. Yet a widely recognized historical pattern from frontier subsistence records shows that small game traps provided a reliable supplement to winter diets when larger hunting became inefficient or dangerous. Traps worked while people rested. That alone made them valuable. You set them deliberately, not everywhere, but in places that make sense. Along narrow paths, near cover, where tracks tell stories. Snow makes these stories readable. You crouch and study prints, noting size, direction, hesitation. Animals conserve energy in winter too. They choose predictability. So do you. You place a trap with steady hands, careful not to leave unnecessary scent. Not because animals are clever in a human way, but because unfamiliar smells disrupt routines. Some frontier guides advised rubbing traps with earth or ash to neutralize scent. Scholars still debate how effective this truly was, but the practice slowed hands and encouraged mindfulness. That alone reduced mistakes. You step back and look once more. Is it balanced? Is the trigger sensitive enough to respond without false release? You adjust slightly. This isn't about cruelty or excitement. It's about efficiency. A trap that fails wastes time and calories. A trap that works ends uncertainty. There's an odd calm in this process. You're not chasing. You're not waiting with tension. You're arranging probabilities. Winter survival often relied less on dramatic success than on modest consistency. One rabbit, one squirrel. Enough to stretch a stew, enough to change tomorrow's energy. A curious but documented habit in some frontier communities involves setting traps at the same time each day, aligning checks with daylight patterns. Not superstition routine. Routine reduced forgotten traps and spoiled catches. Historians still argue whether this discipline came from cultural habit or cognitive necessity during long winters, but repetition clearly mattered. You return later, lantern-low steps careful. Snow creaks softly beneath you. You approach the first trap without expectation. No disappointment, no hope, just attention. It's empty. That's fine. The next one holds weight. You see it immediately. The line pulled taut, the stillness unmistakable. You pause, not out of drama but respect. Food has arrived, calories, warmth. You reset the trap after cleaning it thoroughly. Blood attracts scavengers and disrupts future success. Cleanliness matters even here. Back inside, preparation is quiet and efficient. Nothing wasted, everything used. A mainstream understanding from frontier food records shows that small game often contributed disproportionately to winter nutrition, because it arrived steadily rather than seasonally. It wasn't feast, it was continuity. You cook slowly, combining meat with what you already have. The pot accepts it without complaint. The smell is richer tonight, not indulgent, sustaining. You eat thoughtfully, aware of where this meal came from and what it cost in effort, not much because the tools did the waiting for you. There's a fringe anecdote found in some winter journals describing families who named their traps the way others named tools. Not affection, exactly, accountability. If a trap failed, they remembered which one, which location, which adjustment to make next time. Memory mattered. You clean the tools again before storing them. Metal dries, wood is wiped, nothing is left damp. Winter punishes neglect quickly. You've learned that well enough now. As the night deepens, you feel a subtle shift inside. Anxiety loosens. Food security doesn't mean abundance. It means predictability. Traps offer that. They extend your reach without extending your body into the cold unnecessarily. You settle back near the fire, full but not heavy. Tomorrow will come. The traps will be checked again. The rhythm holds. Winter still presses outside, indifferent. Inside, simple mechanisms quietly continue their work, turning patience into sustenance. Snow changes character once it stops being new. You feel that difference under your boots as soon as you step outside. Fresh snow forgives. Packed snow remembers every footstep. Left unattended, it becomes a ledger of mistakes, slippery, uneven, exhausting to cross. That's when the shovel earns its quiet authority. You lift it from where it rests against the wall, blade worn smooth at the edges. Not elegant, not light, just dependable. Accounts from frontier homesteads consistently show that snow management ranked among the most frequent winter tasks, not because snowfall was dramatic, but because neglect compounded quickly. Snow ignored today becomes ice tomorrow. You don't rush. Rushing slips. You work methodically, clearing paths that matter most first. Doorways, routes to water, paths between shelter and woodpile. Everything else can wait. This prioritization appears again and again in winter journals. People didn't clear everything. They cleared what preserved movement and safety. The shovel bites into snow with a muted sound, not scraping yet. That means you're early enough. Early work is easier work. You angle the blade slightly, letting snow roll instead of lifting it straight up. Energy saved now is warmth saved later. Your breath stays steady. No sweating. That's the goal. There's a lesser-known observation in some frontier manuals, noting that shoveling too close to the ground too early invited ice formation from exposed earth moisture. Leaving a thin layer initially prevented freezing underneath. Scholars still debate how intentional this practice was versus learned habit, but the result was fewer hazards later. You toss snow where it won't drift back. Wind direction matters. You've learned to watch it. Snow placed carelessly becomes tomorrow's obstacle. Snow placed thoughtfully becomes insulation. Along the walls piled snow seals, gaps softening drafts. This confused outsiders, but experienced settlers expected it. Snow could protect as much as it hindered. Your muscles warm as you work, but you stop frequently. Stillness resets breath, movement resumes. This cadence keeps heat balanced. A broadly accepted physiological understanding from winter labour accounts suggests that controlled pacing reduced frost injuries and exhaustion far more effectively than bursts of effort. You clear steps carefully, tapping the shovel to test footing. Ice hides under snow like a trick. You chip gently when needed, not hacking, not forcing. Forced movements slip, deliberate ones hold. As paths open, the space feels larger, movement feels possible again. This is not cosmetic work. It restores options. Without clear paths, every task costs more. Snow management doesn't add comfort, it removes barriers. A quirky regional habit mentioned in some diaries involved marking cleared paths with upright sticks or brush. Not decoration navigation. In heavy snowfall, landmarks vanished. Simple markers prevented disorientation in whiteouts. Small additions prevented large errors. You lean briefly on the shovel, listening. Snow absorbs sound, but not completely. The world feels hushed, focused. You're aware of your body now. Heart steady, fingers warm enough, shoulders loose. This balance tells you when to stop. Pushing past it invites sweat. Sweat invites cold. You finish the essential paths and leave the rest untouched. That restraint feels counterintuitive at first, but winter rewards selectivity. You don't solve everything at once. You solve what matters now. Back inside, you set the shovel near the door blade, down handle angled where you'll see it. Tools left outside freeze unnecessarily. Tools forgotten get buried. Placement is memory made physical. As you warm up, you notice how much quieter the shelter feels now that paths are cleared. No crunching against walls. No sudden thumps as snow slides. Order outside brings calm inside. You hadn't expected that. Historians still argue whether frontier people experienced winter as oppressive or simply demanding. Clearing snow like this suggests something else entirely. Engagement. Winter wasn't endured passively. It was managed actively, one practical motion at a time. You sit and rest muscles, pleasantly tired. The shovel waits patiently, unconcerned with praise. It doesn't need it. It will be used again soon. Snow always returns. For now, movement is easy again. And that ease earned with steady effort feels like a quiet victory worth savouring. The saw announces itself before it ever touches wood, a faint metallic whisper as you lift it, a subtle vibration along the teeth when you run a thumb carefully across them. This tool does not ask for strength. It asks for rhythm. You step outside again, breath steady, and position the log at a comfortable height. Comfort matters more than pride in winter. Cutting wood this way feels different from splitting. It's quieter, more conversational. A well-documented observation from frontier work routines notes that saws conserved energy compared to axes when processing logs into manageable lengths. The axe delivered power. The saw delivered efficiency. Knowing when to use which tool was part of staying warm without burning yourself out. You begin slowly letting the blade find its groove, back, forward, back, forward. The sound settles into a soft, even cadence, almost musical. Cold air carries it cleanly. You don't force the cut. Forcing binds the blade. Binding wastes energy and patience. The saw wants cooperation. As the cut deepens, fine sawdust gathers at your feet, pale against the snow. It smells dry and comforting. This scent tells you the wood is seasoned enough. Green wood smells sharper, wetter. That difference mattered. Burning green wood created smoke and frustration. Seasoned wood burned predictably. Predictability is comfort. You pause often, not from weakness but awareness. Hands stay warm. Breath stays controlled. Frontier labour manuals often emphasised alternating effort and rest, even during simple tasks. Historians still argue whether this advice stemmed from learned efficiency or hard experience with winter injuries, but the pacing clearly worked. There's a quirky little note in some northern settlement letters describing how people preferred saws that sang while cutting. The pitch changed depending on pressure and alignment. While modern acoustics could explain this, many workers used sound as feedback long before they understood why. A smooth song meant the cut was clean. You adjust your stance slightly, keeping shoulders loose. Tension travels down the arms and dulls sensation. Sensation matters. It tells you when the blade begins to wander, when the wood resists. You correct gently. The saw thanks you by gliding again. The cut completes with a quiet release. No crack, no drama, just separation. You lift the finished piece and stack it carefully, mindful of grain and size. Uniform lengths stack better. Better stacks dry evenly. Even drying means better fires later. Every step looks small. Together, they shape the season. You wipe the blade clean, removing sap before it stiffens. Resin left overnight turns into tomorrow's obstacle. This habit appears frequently in winter maintenance notes. Tools cleaned at the end of the day worked better the next. Simple cause, simple effect. Scholars still debate how much frontier efficiency came from innovation versus discipline. Watching yourself now, methodical and unhurried, the answer feels less important than the outcome. You are warm, the work is done, the tool remains reliable. You store the saw where it stays dry, teeth protected. Dull teeth cost time. Sharpening takes light and focus. You'll do it later when conditions are right. Not everything must be addressed immediately. Knowing when to wait is also skill. Inside again, you feel the quiet satisfaction of controlled efforts. The saw didn't exhaust you, it worked with you. That cooperation echoes through winter survival. Tools are partners, not adversaries. You settle near the fire muscles, pleasantly tired, breath even. The sound of the saw still lingers in your ears, soft and steady. A reminder that progress doesn't always need force. Sometimes it only needs rhythm. Storage becomes a kind of quiet architecture in winter. You don't notice it when it works. You only notice when it fails. A lid left loose, a box pushed too close to the wall, a sack resting where dampness creeps upward overnight. These small oversights announce themselves later as spoiled food chewed corners or a smell that tells you something valuable has been lost. You kneel in front of the chest and lift the lid slowly. Wood sighs faintly, adjusting to the temperature change. Inside everything is arranged with intention, not abundance. Order. That difference matters. A broadly accepted observation from frontier household inventories shows that people stored less food than we often imagine, but they stored it more carefully. Care extended usefulness better than quantity. You inspect the interior by touch first. Dry, cool, no condensation. Good. Moisture is the enemy here, not cold. Cold preserves, dampness destroys. You shift a sack slightly, elevating it on a slatted board. Air must move. Stagnant air breeds mold even in winter. This principle appears again and again in winter storage practices, though rarely explained in writing. People learned by losing food once and never wanting to repeat the lesson. The chest itself is simple. Thick boards, tight joints, no decoration. Decorative grooves invited mice. Mice are patient. They test nightly. You run a hand along the seams, checking for new gaps. None. The lid closes flush. You nod satisfied. A curious but documented habit in some frontier homes involved lining storage boxes with dried herbs or ash. The intention wasn't flavour, it was deterrence. While historians still argue how effective these measures truly were, the smell and texture clearly discouraged some pests. Even partial success mattered when replacement food might be months away. You turn your attention to hanging storage next. Items suspended from rafters or beams avoid ground dampness and most animals. You adjust a cord raising a bundle slightly higher, not too high. Reaching overhead wastes energy and invites slips. Winter design always considers effort. A well-established fact drawn from settlement records is that families often reorganize storage multiple times throughout winter, not because supplies changed dramatically, but because conditions did. Temperature shifted, humidity crept in, rodents adapted, static arrangements failed, flexible ones survived. You check a barrel next, tapping the side lightly. The sound tells you if contents have frozen solid or remain usable. Solid means time to plan. Liquid means opportunity. You rotate the barrel a fraction, redistributing pressure. Barrels cracked when ignored. They cracked quietly, then catastrophically. As you work, you notice how storage shapes your mood. Knowing where things are reduces anxiety. You don't wonder, you don't search. Searching wastes light, time, and warmth. Frontier letters frequently mention the comfort of knowing one's stores, not in terms of quantity, but familiarity. There's an old anecdote about a homesteader who labelled nothing, insisting memory was enough. It worked until illness clouded attention. After that, winter labels appeared. Scholars still debate whether written labels were common or rare, but some form of marking knots in cord notches in wood placement patterns was nearly universal. Memory needs backup in winter. You rearrange a few items, bringing soon-to-be-used supplies forward, pushing long-term stores back. This rotation prevents forgotten food. Forgotten food spoils unnoticed. Noticing early gives options. You mark the change mentally, not formally. Your mind is already adapting to these cycles. Outside, the wind shifts again. Inside, nothing rattles. That silence matters. It means storage is secure. Nothing rolling, nothing falling. Order resists noise. You pause and sit back on your heels, letting the room settle. The smell here is neutral. Wood, dry grain, salt, no sweetness. Sweetness would mean trouble. You've learned to trust your nose. Winter sharpened it. A lesser-known detail from some northern settlements describes people keeping small, empty boxes within larger storage chests. These weren't mistakes, they acted as buffers, absorbing moisture changes and confusing rodents. Whether intentional or accidental, the practice persisted. Persistence usually indicates usefulness. You close lids carefully, never slamming. Shock loosens joints. Joints loosened in winter rarely reseated properly. You secure cords, check knots. Knots stiffen in cold. Loose knots fail. You retie one finger steady. As you finish, there's a sense of completion that feels deeper than tidiness. This work extends the reach of your effort. Every item stored well is a task you don't have to repeat under worse conditions later. That foresight is winter's real luxury. Historians still argue whether frontier life was defined more by scarcity or by management. Standing here, storage complete, the answer feels clear. Scarcity existed, yes, but management determined outcomes. Two households with identical supplies could fare very differently depending on how those supplies were protected. You stand stretching slowly. The chest sits quietly now, doing its job. It will not call attention to itself again unless something goes wrong. That's the highest compliment a storage system can earn. You move back toward the fire, hands relaxed, mind settled. Outside, the cold presses on, uninterested. Inside, your stores wait dry and secure. Winter doesn't feel smaller, but it feels contained, and containment is a form of control. Preservation work carries a different kind of silence. Not the quiet of snow or the hush of night, but the focused stillness that settles when you know mistakes will echo for weeks. You stand near the fire with salt close at hand, smoke drifting lazily upward, and feel how the air itself becomes part of the process. Winter meals depend less on what you catch and more on what you keep. A widely accepted historical reality, drawn from frontier food logs, is that preserved foods, salted, smoked, dried, made up the backbone of cold season diets. Fresh meat was unpredictable. Preserved meat was planning. You rub salt into cuts of meat with steady hands, not aggressively. Salt works on its own timeline. Too much wastes a resource and hardens flesh beyond usefulness. Too little invites spoilage. Balance again. Winter seems to return to that lesson endlessly. The salt stings faintly on cracked skin. You ignore it. Gloves dull sensation and lead to clumsiness. Bare hands tell the truth. You work methodically, turning pieces, pressing salt into seams and folds where moisture hides. Moisture is the real enemy here. Cold alone does not rot food. Dampness does. Once salted, the meat rests briefly, drawing out liquid. You watch it without impatience. Waiting is part of the work. Frontier routines often included long pauses like this, not because people had leisure, but because processes demanded time. Historians still argue whether these pauses shaped a slower worldview or simply reflected material limits, but the pauses existed regardless. You move the meat toward the smoke, next hanging it where air circulates, but heat remains indirect. Smoke isn't about cooking, it's about protection. It dries surfaces, it discourages insects when they appear later. It adds flavour as a side effect. A commonly cited observation from settlement records notes that over-smoking ruined food as surely as under-smoking. Moderation preserved texture and nutrition. The smell changes gradually. Sharp salt softens, smoke deepens. You breathe it in, recognizing it as winter's scent. This smell meant future meals, security, continuity. There's a quirky but persistent tradition in some regions of using specific woods for smoking, not because they burned better, but because they imparted familiar flavors associated with home. While scholars still debate how much flavor choice influenced morale, letters suggest that taste memory mattered deeply during long winters. You check airflow carefully. Too much draft dries too fast, hardening the exterior and trapping moisture inside. Too little allows dampness to linger. You adjust a vent slightly, just enough. These micro corrections define successful preservation. Nearby, thin slices of vegetables dry slowly suspended on cords: carrots, onions, herbs. They look fragile now, but they will carry strength later. Dried foods weigh little, store well, and rehydrate obediently. A mainstream understanding from frontier provisioning shows that dried produce contributed essential nutrients when fresh options vanished. You turn slices occasionally, preventing sticking. This small attention prevents loss. Winter magnifies neglect. It rarely forgives it. As the work continues, you feel a subtle satisfaction settle in. Preservation is future-facing labor. It asks you to imagine yourself hungry weeks from now and to care for that future person. That act of care steadies the mind. A lesser-known anecdote describes families telling children stories while salting or smoking food, turning the work into memory-making. The work itself was repetitive. Stories softened it. Scholars still debate whether such practices were intentional teaching tools or simple coping mechanisms, but they bound labor to identity. You finish the day's preservation tasks, slowly checking each piece one last time. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. You wash your hands carefully, dry them thoroughly, and warm them briefly near the fire. The preserved food hangs quietly now, doing its own work. You step back and assess. Enough, not excess. Enough buys time. Time buys rest. Rest buys clarity. Outside, night presses closer. Inside, future meals wait patiently. You've extended your reach beyond today without leaving the shelter. Winter may last as long as it wants. You've already answered it weeks in advance. Warmth changes shape at night. You feel it sink lower, pooling where bodies gather, thinning near the walls. Blankets become more than comfort now. They become architecture. You lift one, testing its weight, and immediately know which will go closest to the body and which belongs on top. Experience teaches this faster than instruction ever could. You spread bedding with intention, not haste. Straw beneath smoothed by hand. Thicker layers next. Heavier covers last. A broadly accepted historical understanding, drawn from winter household accounts, is that layering mattered more than sheer thickness. Trapped air did the real work. Weight kept drafts out. Order determined success. You sit briefly on the edge of the sleeping space, letting warmth build where it will matter most. Stillness has a role here too. Moving too much before sleep cools the body faster. You slow your motions almost ceremonially because the night will ask you to stay still for many hours. You shake a blanket once, sharply listening to how it settles. Dust falls away. Moisture escapes. A curious detail from some frontier notes mentions families hanging blankets near the fire earlier in the evening, not to heat them, but to dry invisible damp. Scholars still debate how much moisture accumulated indoors during winter, but accounts consistently stress dryness as the difference between warmth and chill. You arrange pillows not for comfort in the modern sense, but for insulation. Gaps invite cold, shoulders lose heat faster than people realize. You tuck edges, carefully sealing spaces where air likes to sneak in. This attention feels almost parental. You are caring for the body you will inhabit through the night. A mainstream observation from winter medical journals of the period notes that uninterrupted sleep correlated strongly with survival outcomes. People who slept cold woke depleted. People who slept warm woke capable. Bedding was not luxury, it was strategy. You notice how close everything feels now. Blankets pull the room inward, making the sleeping space smaller, more contained. That containment reassures. Winter outside feels larger, louder. Inside, boundaries matter. There's a lesser-known practice described in some settlements of placing warmed stones near bedding, wrapped carefully in cloth. Not too hot, never bare. While historians still argue about how common this was, the principle was sound, concentrated warmth in one place could stabilize body temperature through the night. You don't have stones tonight, but you understand the logic. You lie back slowly, testing the arrangement. The blankets settle with you, not against you. That's important. Resistance means gaps will form later. Cooperation means warmth stays where you need it. You adjust once more, then stop. Fidgeting wastes heat. The fire has been banked low, just enough to survive the night. Flames are unnecessary now. Embers hold steadier warmth. You listen to their quiet presence, a faint reassurance rather than a demand. Outside, wind shifts direction. You feel it not as cold, but as pressure. The structure responds with a soft creak. The blankets respond by holding. That contrast matters. It tells you your preparation worked. Some frontier families slept together during winter bodies, arranged to share warmth efficiently. This practice often surprises modern readers, but contemporaneous accounts treat it matter-of-factly. Privacy yielded to physics. Scholars still debate how these arrangements shaped family dynamics, but there's no debate about their effectiveness. Tonight you sleep alone, but the principle remains. Blankets substitute where bodies would have been. Layers overlap, intentionally reducing exposed surface area. You curl slightly instinctively, conserving heat. The position feels natural. Your body knows what to do. Your breathing slows. The cold outside becomes abstract, distant. Not gone, just irrelevant for now. Inside the blankets, the air warms and stays warmed. That stability invites rest. You think briefly about how many nights like this stretch ahead. The thought doesn't weigh on you the way it once might have. Each night solved is proof that the next can be solved too. Tools don't just protect the body, they calm the mind. There's a faint smell of wool and smoke, comforting and familiar. These scents signal safety. They've become associated with warmth, rest, continuity. Sensory memory builds quietly, in winter, reinforcing habits without conscious effort. You shift once more, then still. The blankets hold. No drafts, no cold seams, just steady warmth earned through attention earlier in the evening. Historians still argue whether frontier resilience was taught or simply demanded by conditions. Lying here wrapped and prepared, the answer feels simple. Resilience was practiced nightly in small choices that compounded. Your muscles release their last tension. The day's labour fades from your shoulders. The fire murmurs softly, almost inaudible now. Outside, snow continues its patient work, reshaping the world without concern. Inside, you are held. Blankets layered and arranged do their quiet job. You allow yourself to rest fully, knowing that when morning comes, you will wake warm enough to begin again. Morning brings texture before it brings light. You feel it in the fabric, against your skin the way wool yields, and leather resists the way nothing clings damply. the way cotton would. Clothing here is not about preference, it's about forgiveness. Materials either pardon mistakes or punish them. You dress slowly, deliberately, letting each layer settle. A widely acknowledged reality from winter frontier accounts is that wool and leather dominated cold weather clothing, not because they were comfortable, but because they behaved predictably when wet, dirty, or worn thin. Predictability mattered more than softness. Warmth that vanishes at the first error is not warmth at all. You pull on a wool shirt and feel its weight distribute evenly. It doesn't hug the body, it floats just enough to trap air. Air does the work. You add another layer thinner this time, then pause. Too many layers restrict movement and invite sweat. Sweat invites trouble. You've learned this lesson without needing to suffer it badly. Leather comes next, stiff at first, then slowly cooperative as it warms. Leather blocks wind. It shields wool from abrasion. It accepts scuffs without complaint. Frontier journals often mention leather as trustworthy, a word that sounds sentimental until you've depended on it through repeated storms. There's a strange detail recorded in some settlements about people deliberately wearing slightly worn clothing during winter labour, saving newer garments for rest days. Scholars still debate whether this was thrift or wisdom, but worn fabric flexed more easily and chafed less. Comfort again was functional. You check seams with your fingers, especially where movement concentrates, elbows, knees, shoulders. Wool pills slightly, leather creases, neither fails suddenly. That gradual failure gives you time to respond. Cotton, by contrast, gives no warning. It feels fine until it doesn't. By then, cold has already claimed ground. A mainstream observation from period medical writings notes that hypothermia symptoms appeared more frequently among those wearing absorbent fabrics that trapped moisture. The conclusion wasn't scientific in modern terms, but it was accurate enough to shape habits. People noticed patterns, they adjusted. You tie off a strap not too tight. Constriction limits circulation. Limited circulation chills extremities. These small physiological truths guided clothing choices long before anyone explained them formally. Bodies taught lessons directly. There's a quirky regional habit described in some northern communities of rubbing snow into wool garments during dry cold spells. It sounds counterintuitive, but the snow brushed away dirt and oils that attracted moisture later. Whether effective or not, the practice reflected careful observation of material behavior. You finish dressing and move near the door, feeling how layers interact. Nothing binds, nothing flaps excessively. That balance tells you the day will go smoothly. Clothing that distracts wastes attention. Attention is finite in winter. Historians still argue whether frontier clothing practices were inherited traditions or rapidly evolved solutions. Standing here fully dressed, the distinction blurs. What matters is that these choices worked season after season without needing reinvention. You step outside and feel the wind glance off leather slide past wool. Cold touches you, but it doesn't settle. That's the goal. You don't eliminate cold, you manage it. You take a few steps, testing mobility. Everything moves with you. Nothing resists. That cooperation reduces fatigue later. Fatigue invites mistakes. Mistakes invite cold. As the day begins, you feel quietly prepared. Not armoured, just appropriately dressed. The materials you wear don't ask for constant thought. They free your mind for other tasks. You glance down once more, adjusting a cuff, smoothing a seam. Small corrections early prevent irritation later. Irritation becomes distraction. Distraction becomes danger. With that done, you step fully into the day, wrapped in materials that have earned trust through generations of use. They don't promise comfort, they promise reliability. And in winter, reliability is enough. Furniture stops pretending to be background once winter arrives. You notice it immediately when you sit. The bench doesn't sag, the table doesn't wobble. Nothing here invites you to sprawl or fidget. Everything asks you to settle with purpose. That request feels almost polite, and you respond without thinking. A broadly recognized truth from frontier household records is that furniture was built to endure weight repetition and repair rather than comfort in the modern sense. Chairs were not lounged in, beds were not escaped into. These objects supported work, rest and warmth, nothing more, nothing less. You run a hand along the edge of the table. The corners are softened, not rounded for style, but worn by years of hands passing over them. That wear tells you where people stood, leaned, paused. Furniture holds memory, the way paths hold footsteps. It teaches you where to be. You sit again, feet planted, posture naturally upright. Slouching feels wrong here. Not forbidden, just inefficient. A straight back keeps lungs open. Open lungs warm blood faster. This connection wasn't written down in any manual, but it appears again and again in how furniture was shaped and used. Bodies adapted to objects, and objects adapted to bodies. There's a curious detail noted in some settlement descriptions about benches being slightly higher than modern seating. Scholars still debate whether this reduced heat loss from cold floors or simply made standing easier for stiff joints. Either way, you feel the benefit immediately when you rise again without effort. You adjust a small stool near the fire, placing it where warmth gathers, but sparks cannot reach. This isn't decoration, it's positioning. Furniture here is mobile, not fixed. It moves with the season. Winter pulls everything closer together, minimizing wasted space and heat. The sleeping platform draws your attention next, raised slightly off the floor, not to elevate status, but to escape the coldest air. Cold sinks, warmth rises. This principle shapes the entire room. Beds near the floor slept colder. Beds raised slept longer. A mainstream observation from winter survival accounts confirms this pattern across regions and climates. You check the supports underneath, pressing gently. Solid, no wobble, structural failures at night were dangerous. Startle burns energy, sudden exposure burns heat. Furniture stability mattered more in darkness than daylight. There's an old anecdote about a family who shortened table legs in winter so people could sit closer to the fire while working. When spring came, the legs were lengthened again. Whether this story is widespread or isolated is still debated, but it reveals how flexible furniture design could be when necessity outweighed tradition. You notice how few pieces there are. No extras, no duplicates. Each object earns its space by serving multiple roles. The table is a workspace dining surface repair bench. The bench is seating step storage support. Multi-purpose design wasn't a philosophy, it was survival. You lean back briefly, listening to the structure respond. No creaks of complaint, just the faint sound of wood adjusting. This sound reassures you. It means nothing is stressed beyond its limit. Historians still argue whether frontier interiors felt sparse or simply efficient to those who lived in them. Sitting here, the space doesn't feel empty. It feels clear. Nothing distracts. Nothing demands attention. That clarity is restful, in a way decoration rarely is. You move a chest slightly closer to the sleeping area, shortening tomorrow's morning steps. Fewer steps mean less cold exposure before the fire wakes fully. This adjustment feels small, but winter is built from small decisions. You sit again, hands resting comfortably. Posture supported without effort. Furniture here doesn't cradle you. It holds you steady. That steadiness encourages alert relaxation, rest without collapse. As evening approaches, the room tightens gently around you. Furniture gathers inward, forming a warmer core. You don't resist this, you cooperate. Cooperation saves energy. You realize something quietly important. These objects are not passive. They guide behavior. They nudge you toward efficiency without words. In winter, guidance without instruction is a gift. You settle into that guidance now, letting your body align with the shapes around it. Everything fits. Nothing strains. The cold remains outside, doing what it does best. Inside, simple furniture holds its ground, and in doing so, helps you hold yours. Time behaves differently once winter takes hold. You don't feel minutes pass the way you used to. Instead, you sense shifts, light thinning shadows, stretching the fire's mood changing. Without clocks to insist on precision, you learn to read time the way you read weather. Carefully, indirectly, with attention. You glance toward the small opening that serves as a window. The angle of light tells you enough. Morning has fully arrived, but not generously. A commonly recognized fact from frontier life is that many households owned clocks, but relied on them less during winter favouring natural cues that aligned better with daylight and labour. When the sun sets early, schedules must follow suit. You move closer to the fire and notice the colour of the flame. Blue at the base, yellow above, steady. That steadiness means it has been burning long enough to mark the day's beginning. Fire becomes a timekeeper. When it needs feeding time has passed. When it settles, another portion has gone. You listen for sounds outside. Distant birds. None yet. The absence matters. In winter, sound arrives later. People learn to notice these delays. Historians still argue whether this heightened awareness of sensory timing sharpened perception long term. But in the moment, it simply helps you decide what to do next. You eat when the light allows you to see the bowl clearly. Not before, not after. Eating in poor light risks spills and wasted heat. That practical concern appears frequently in winter journals, often phrased simply as we ate, while it was still good light. No hours, no minutes, just conditions. You check shadows on the wall. They've shifted enough to suggest midday is near. Midday in winter is brief. It's when outdoor work feels most forgiving. You plan accordingly, stepping out while the cold relents slightly. This habit of aligning tasks with light rather than clock time was widespread, shaping labour patterns across regions. There's a curious practice mentioned in some settlements of marking time, by candle burn, length carving small notches into holders to estimate passage. Scholars still debate how precise this method truly was, but it offered a rough measure when daylight disappeared. Precision mattered less than predictability. You return inside later and notice how tired you feel, not from exertion, but from concentration. Winter demands constant assessment. Reading time, without instruments, uses attention. That attention has limits. You sit and rest when the fire tells you it's time. Flames lower, heat softens. It's a natural pause. The lantern too becomes a signal. When it needs trimming, the evening has progressed. When oil runs low, night is deep. These cues guide you gently toward rest without insisting. Modern clocks push, these tools invite. A mainstream observation from period correspondence notes that winter days often felt shorter, not only because of light loss, but because fewer tasks fit comfortably within safe conditions. Time compressed. People adapted by letting go of rigid expectations. You feel that adaptation happening in you now. You don't rush to fill every moment. You choose what fits. The rest waits. Waiting feels acceptable here. As night arrives, you bank the fire earlier than you might in warmer months. This isn't resignation, it's strategy. Long nights are survived by sleeping through them, not by fighting wakefulness. Historians still argue whether winter sleep patterns shifted significantly on the frontier, but evidence suggests people rested more when darkness dominated. You lie down and notice how time loosens its grip. There's no tomorrow alarm to set. Morning will announce itself through temperature, light, sound. Your body will know, it already does. This way of keeping time calms the mind. There's no ticking, no counting, just progression. You drift towards sleep with the sense that the day concluded when it should have not, when a device insisted. Winter doesn't steal time, it reshapes it. And once you learn to read its language, you stop missing what you no longer need. Repair becomes instinct before it becomes urgent. You notice the looseness in a handle, the wobble in a joint, the dullness creeping into an edge, and your body responds almost automatically. Replace isn't an option here. There is only restore. Winter makes that clear quickly. You gather the small collection of tools kept for this purpose. A hammer with a handle darkened by years of sweat and oil. A handful of nails straightened and reused more times than you can count. A file worn smooth where fingers grip it. None of these look impressive. Yet a well-established historical reality from frontier homesteads shows that repair tools were among the most frequently used items during winter months. New supplies arrived rarely. Old ones were made to last. You sit near the fire, positioning the object carefully. Heat loosens wood fibers, just enough to accept correction. Cold resists. Timing matters. You tap gently, not driving force, but guiding alignment. Each strike is measured. Loud blows crack wood. Quiet ones persuade it. There's a peculiar note in some settlement accounts describing how people could feel when a tool was ready to be fixed, even before visible damage appeared. Scholars still debate whether this was intuition or simply familiarity sharpened by constant use. Either way, early repair prevented catastrophic failure later. You check a blade next, running a thumb carefully along the edge. Dull, but not ruined. Good. You take the file and draw it along the metal in smooth strokes, maintaining the original angle. Sharpening isn't about creating the keenest edge possible. It's about restoring the edge the tool expects. 2 sharp chips, 2 dull slips. The sound of metal on file is soft, rhythmic. You count strokes without counting, stopping when resistance changes. That change tells you enough. Frontier repair manuals were rare. Most learning happened through sound, touch, and repetition. A mainstream observation from period letters notes that many people preferred repairing tools at night near the fire when movement outside was limited. This wasn't laziness, it was efficiency. Daylight was reserved for tasks that required it. Night was for maintenance. You turn to wood next. A crack along a handle, small but honest. You bind it with cord tight but not choking, then coat it lightly with resin. This method appears frequently in winter repair notes, especially where replacement handles were scarce. It wasn't permanent, it was sufficient. Sufficient carries you through. There's a quirky detail recorded in some regions of people talking to their tools while repairing them, not in superstition, but focus. Speaking slowed hands. Slower hands made fewer mistakes. Winter rewarded calm. You set the repaired items aside, letting them cool and settle. Rushing back into use invites failure. Patience extends repairs the way care extends food. Historians still argue whether this constant repair culture fostered innovation or conservatism. Sitting here, hands warm, tools aligned again, the distinction feels less important than the outcome. Everything works. That's enough. You clean the workspace thoroughly, gathering filings, wiping surfaces. Metal dust rusts when left. Rust spreads quietly. Cleanliness here isn't aesthetic, it's preventative. As you finish, there's a sense of quiet closure. Nothing dramatic was accomplished, no new object created, and yet tomorrow will be easier because of this hour. That matters. You return tools to their places carefully. Placement preserves memory. When fatigue hits, memory fails first. Tools placed correctly save energy later. You lean back and let the fire's warmth reach your hands one last time. They ache slightly, but it's a useful ache, the kind that signals readiness rather than strain. Outside, winter continues its steady pressure. Inside, everything holds. Repair has done its work unseen and essential. You rest easier knowing that when something fails next, and something always does, you will meet it prepared, not surprised. Night changes the rules. Sounds carry farther, mistakes feel larger, and every unnecessary movement costs more than it did an hour ago. You notice this as soon as you shift your weight on the floor and hear the faint creak answer back. It's not loud, just informative, enough to remind you that winter nights reward quiet. You move with intention now, choosing tools that cooperate with silence. Wood against wood, leather instead of metal, cloth wrapped around anything that might clatter. A broadly acknowledged pattern from frontier household routines shows that people deliberately altered how they worked after dark, favouring quieter methods to conserve energy and reduce accidents. Dark samyaha. Darkness magnified small errors. Samsas. You pick up a tool and test it gently before using it. A soft tap instead of a strike. Pressure instead of force. This restraint feels natural now. Noise wastes warmth, it startles the body. Startle tightens muscles. Tight muscles burn fuel. You set a small task in motion, perhaps trimming a cord, adjusting a hinge, preparing something for morning. The lantern burns low, steady. You don't need much light. Too much light encourages activity. Too little encourages restlessness. You've learned where the balance sits. There's an interesting observation tucked into some winter journals, describing how people could tell which tools belong to nighttime work by sound alone. The scrape of a file. The whisper of a knife on wood. Scholars still debate whether this was conscious categorization or simple habit. but the effect was the same. Certain tasks waited for daylight, others fit naturally into the hush. You pause, often listening. Not out of fear, but calibration. The house speaks at night, walls cool, wood contracts, the fire settles. These sounds form a baseline. Anything outside that baseline deserves attention. Silence, paradoxically, sharpens awareness. A quirky detail from some settlements mentions families padding tool handles with cloth during winter evenings. Not to protect hands, but to dull sound. It wasn't permanent, it was situational. The goal was to keep the household calm, especially when children or the elderly slept nearby. You finish the task without hurry and set the tool down, carefully placing it exactly where it won't be knocked later. Placement matters more in the dark. Searching wastes warmth and patience. A mainstream understanding from frontier accident reports shows that nighttime injuries often resulted from misplaced tools rather than difficult work. You sit back and let stillness return. The fire's embers glow faintly enough to mark space without inviting movement. You resist the urge to poke them. Poking wakes the fire. A woken fire demands attention. Tonight, attention is better spent resting. Historians still argue whether frontier nights were truly quieter than modern ones or simply perceived that way due to lack of artificial noise. Either way, the behaviour they encouraged was real. Slower movements, softer actions, longer pauses. You stretch gently joints, responding without complaint. Quiet work hasn't taxed you. That's the point. Winter nights are not for progress, they are for preservation. As you prepare for sleep, you notice how calm the space feels. Nothing rattles, nothing intrudes. The tools you used have already retreated into the background, their work done without announcement. You lie back, breathing evenly. Outside wind moves through trees with its own low rhythm. Inside, silence holds steady. This quiet isn't emptiness, it's balance. You drift toward rest, knowing that the night passed without demand because you respected its rules. And in winter, respect often returns the favour. You notice the children before they make any sound. They're already moving, already adjusting, already learning without being told that winter does not wait for explanations. They watch hands more than mouths. They copy motions long before they understand reasons. That quiet absorption is one of the most effective tools in the room. You hand over a simple task, nothing heavy, nothing sharp. Carrying kindling, laying out socks, checking that a door cloth still hangs straight. These jobs look small, but a widely accepted observation from frontier household records shows that children participated in winter routines as soon as they could walk steadily. This wasn't severity, it was continuity. Skills learned early became automatic later, and automatic habits saved lives. You watch how carefully they handle the objects, not perfectly, just carefully enough. When a stick drops, there's no scolding, it's picked up again. When a sock twists, it's smoothed without comment. Winter instruction here is wordless. Correction happens through repetition, not reprimand. There's a subtle intelligence in this approach. Telling someone what to do consumes time and energy. Showing them consumes less. Letting them try consumes almost none. Historians still argue whether frontier parenting was shaped more by necessity or philosophy, but winter demanded efficiency in all things, including teaching. You notice how children move more than adults. Constant motion, small steps, frequent shifts. Adults understood instinctively that stillness chilled small bodies faster. Tasks were framed as errands, not obligations. Movement stayed playful. Warmth stayed circulating. A curious anecdote from some settlement diaries describes children being assigned watch duties, listening for changes in fire sound or wind direction. This wasn't responsibility in the modern sense, it was awareness training. Scholars still debate how intentional this practice was, but it clearly sharpened attention, while making children feel included rather than idle. You kneel beside them briefly, not to instruct, but to align your movement with theirs. Shared pace matters. When adults slow to a child's rhythm, learning deepens. The task becomes communal, not hierarchical. Tools are introduced gradually. First the safe ones, then the useful ones. The knife comes last, and only after hands have learned respect through other objects. This progression appears again and again in frontier accounts. Tools weren't toys, they were trust. You watch a child mimic the way you set an object down, handle turned, outward edge away. They don't know why yet, they just know it's right. That knowledge will surface later when explanation becomes unnecessary. There's a mainstream understanding drawn from educational historians that experiential learning dominated frontier childhoods. Formal schooling existed, but winter education happened at home through participation. Survival skills were learned the same way language was, by immersion. You notice how mistakes are allowed to remain small, a mitten misplaced, a bucket set down too hard, nothing catastrophic. Small errors teach without cost. Large errors are prevented through supervision rather than punishment. As evening approaches, children grow quieter without being told. Light fades, energy follows. They sense it before you do. Winter rhythms imprint early. Bodies learn when to slow without needing clocks. There's a lesser-known habit described in some homes of children being responsible for closing the day. Checking that tools were returned, doors secured, fire banked. This ritual marked transition. Day became night, work became rest. Whether intended as teaching or comfort, it created structure. You watch as they complete these tasks, not perfectly, but earnestly. Earnestness matters more than precision at this stage. Precision comes later. Right now, familiarity is the goal. You sit back and let them finish without hovering. Trust builds quietly. Hovering disrupts. Winter rewards confidence, paired with care. Scholars still debate whether frontier children matured faster than modern ones, or simply adapted differently. Observing them now, the answer feels nuanced. They don't hurry toward adulthood. They just belong fully to their environment. Winter doesn't separate ages. It includes everyone. As the fire settles and blankets are prepared, children drift naturally toward rest. No resistance, no negotiation. The day has used them well. Sleep arrives as continuation, not interruption. You tuck them in, checking warmth without fuss. Small hands curl instinctively. Bodies seek efficiency, even in sleep. You adjust a blanket edge, sealing a draft. No words needed. You step back and listen. Breathing steadies. The room softens. Teaching has happened today, without lectures, without effort. Tools passed hand to hand. Habits passed body to body. Outside, the cold presses on as always. Inside, knowledge has quietly transferred to the next generation, embedded in motion rather than memory. You settle into your own place, aware that winter survival here is not just individual. It's collective, continuous, and already being practiced by those who will carry it forward. You start noticing the animals before you realize you're relying on them. Not in a sentimental way, in a practical one. Their behavior shifts subtly, long before the weather announces itself to you. Winter makes them honest. They don't pretend comfort when it's leaving. You step outside and watch quietly. The horse has turned its hindquarters toward the windtail, tucked head low. That posture isn't random. A widely accepted observation from frontier farm records shows that livestock behavior was often used as an early indicator of weather change, especially during winter when formal forecasts did not exist. Animals conserved energy instinctively. Their choices revealed what was coming. You listen to the dog next. Its breathing is steady. It has chosen a sleeping spot closer to the wall than usual. Not anxious, just strategic. Dogs learned shelter placement as carefully as people did. When they shifted, it mattered. You scan the chicken's roost. They've settled earlier than yesterday. Feathers puffed, movement minimal. Cold deepens fastest at dusk. Birds respond first. You store that information without comment. No need to announce it. You'll bank the fire a little earlier tonight. That's all. There's a lesser-known note in some frontier journals describing families delaying travel plans because livestock refused to move willingly in the morning. Scholars still debate whether this was superstition or empirical wisdom, but those who listened avoided storms that arrived hours later. Animals sensed pressure changes humans missed. You move closer to the barn hand, resting lightly on the door. You don't rush, you don't startle. Animals respond poorly to urgency in winter. Calm keeps everyone warmer. You check bedding, adding straw where bodies compress it thin. Insulation works best when it has volume. A mainstream understanding from agricultural records confirms that animals kept warmer through proper bedding required less feed to maintain weight. Feed saved meant food saved for people too. Winter systems intertwined. Nothing operated alone. You notice a cow shifting its weight repeatedly. Not discomfort, anticipation. Wind direction is changing. You feel it moments later brushing the side of your face differently. Animals felt it first. There's a quirky practice mentioned in some settlements of hanging small ribbons or bits of cloth near animal shelters to watch airflow. While scholars still debate how common this was, the idea mirrors what animals already demonstrated through movement. Living indicators outperform tools. You adjust a door latch, narrowing an opening. Too tight traps moisture. Too loose invites draft. Animals suffer silently until they don't. Prevention here matters more than reaction. As you finish, you pause and simply watch. Animals settle again once conditions stabilize. That settling tells you you've done enough. Overcorrecting causes stress. Stress burns energy. Energy is precious. You step back toward the house with this new information folded into your plans. Tomorrow's tasks may shift. Wood might need stacking sooner. Water might need extra protection. None of this feels urgent. It feels informed. Historians still argue whether frontier people truly trusted animal behavior or simply observed it coincidentally. Standing here, the distinction feels thin. Trust grows from accuracy. Accuracy comes from watching. Inside, you adjust the fire slightly, then stop. No need to do more. The animals have already spoken. You listened. As night settles, you feel a quiet reassurance. You're not alone in reading winter anymore. The landscape is communicating constantly through breath, posture, and movement. You lie down later with that awareness confident, not because you control the weather, but because you noticed it early enough to respond gently. Winter presses on outside, deliberate and patient. Inside, you rest knowing that many eyes, human and animal alike, are watching alongside you, each doing their part to make it through the night. Fire has more than one personality. You've learned that by now. There is the cooking fire, eager and focused, and there is the living fire, steady and restrained. Confusing the two costs more than fuel. It costs comfort, dryness, and sometimes health. You kneel near the hearth and study the coals before adding anything. Cooking heat announces itself quickly. Living heat works slowly, almost shyly. A widely accepted understanding from frontier household practices is that families deliberately managed separate fire behaviors even when only one hearth existed. They adjusted fuel size placement and airflow depending on the task. Fire was shaped, not unleashed. You build the living fire first. Thick pieces, even spacing, limited air. The goal isn't flame, it's presence. A low, consistent heat that warms bodies without encouraging sweat. Sweat is dangerous in winter. Moisture steals heat faster than cold ever could. You sit back and feel the difference, almost immediately. The room warms evenly. No sudden rush, no stinging face, just a gradual easing of tension. This is the fire you live with. It doesn't demand attention every few minutes. It allows you to breathe normally. Later, when food needs preparing, you alter the arrangement. Smaller pieces, more air, controlled flame. Cooking fire wakes up quickly, does its job, then quiets again. Frontier cooking. Accounts frequently note that meals were prepared efficiently to avoid overheating the body. Overheated cooks stepped into cold air and paid for it later. There's a curious anecdote recorded in some homesteads of people changing clothes after cooking even in winter. Scholars still debate how common this was, but the reasoning appears sound. Cooking produced sweat. Sweat cooled dangerously once activity stopped. A dry layer prevented chill. You watch how smoke behaves. Thick smoke means wasted heat and poor airflow. Thin, steady smoke means balance. You adjust a vent slightly, just enough. These adjustments are instinctive now. You don't think about them. Your hands move before thought forms. A mainstream observation from winter medical notes suggests that respiratory issues were more common in poorly ventilated homes despite the cold. People learned to respect airflow even when it seemed counterintuitive. Stale air harmed as surely as cold drafts. You finish cooking and step back, letting the fire settle into its quieter role again. This transition matters. Fires left too hot into the evening dried the air excessively, cracked skin and disrupted sleep. Living fire supports rest. Cooking fire disrupts it. There's a lesser-known habit described in some settlements of using specific pieces of wood only for living fires, woods that burned slower, produced less smoke, and held coals longer. Whether this was planned forestry or simple preference remains debated, but the effect was clear. Certain fuels match certain needs. You bank the fire, gently tucking embers under ash, not smothering, just protecting. The fire responds by lowering its voice, not extinguishing it. That cooperative response feels earned. You sit and notice how your body reacts. No sweat, no chill, just steady warmth. This is success measured quietly. No one praises a well-managed fire. They simply benefit from it. Historians still argue whether frontier people thought of fire management as skill or instinct. Watching yourself now, the line disappears. Repetition has turned skill into instinct into comfort. As night deepens, the living fire holds. The room stays calm. Cooking is done. Movement slows. The house breathes evenly. You prepare for rest, knowing that the fire will not demand your attention again for hours. That trust is hard-won. It comes from understanding fire's different roles and respecting them. Outside, winter presses its cold against the walls. Inside, heat remains contained, disciplined and patient. You settle in confident that tonight at least the fire will work with you rather than against you. You don't think of medicine as a separate thing out here. It's woven into observation, pacing and restraint. Winter illness rarely announces itself clearly. It disguises symptoms, blurs causes and punishes overreaction as much as neglect. That's why the tools you rely on are simple, almost invisible. You sit quietly and listen to your own breathing. Steady, not shallow, good. A broadly accepted historical reality, drawn from frontier medical notes, is that many cold season ailments were assessed without instruments, relying instead on observation of breath, skin warmth, alertness, and coordination. Diagnosis began with attention, not intervention. You check your hands next, not for pain, but for response. Do fingers warm when held close to the body? Does sensation return evenly? These questions mattered more than numbers. Thermometers were rare, touch was immediate. You reach for a small mirror, clouded at the edges. You breathe onto it and watch the fog form. Even. No rattling, no hesitation. This simple test appears in several winter care accounts, not as formal method, but as reassurance. Clear breath meant clear lungs, at least for now. A curious detail from some homesteads mentions people using feathers or light threads held near the mouth to observe airflow. Scholars still debate whether this offered meaningful insight, but it slowed the moment, forced attention, and discouraged panic. That alone improved outcomes. You drink warm water, slowly feeling it settle. Hydration matters more in cold than people expect. Thirst dulls in winter. Dehydration hides behind fatigue. A mainstream understanding from period health writings notes that many winter complaints improve simply by restoring fluids and rest. You check balance next. Standing, turning, sitting. Any dizziness? None. That's important. Cold stress often revealed itself through coordination before pain. Early detection meant early rest. You open a small tin containing dried herbs, not a cure-all, just support, mint for comfort, willow bark for aches. Use is measured. Overuse dulls effect. Frontier medicine favoured moderation because supplies were limited and reactions unpredictable. Historians still argue whether herbal remedies truly improved outcomes or merely comforted patients. Comfort, however, changes behaviour. A comfortable person rests. Rest preserves heat. Preservation matters. You warm your feet briefly, then pull them away. Overheating invites sweating. Sweating invites chill. Even care must be balanced. There's a lesser-known practice described in some settlements of assigning someone to watch a sick person, not constantly, but intermittently, checking response rather than hovering. This prevented both neglect and exhaustion. Care was paced. You feel fine tonight, that's good, but you don't assume tomorrow will be the same. Tools are kept ready. Cloths, warm drinks, knowledge. Preparation reduces fear. As you settle back, you understand something quietly important. Winter medicine is mostly about knowing when not to act. Panic burns energy. Energy is medicine. You lie down confident, not because you can cure everything, but because you can notice enough to respond early. You begin to notice wear differently now. Not as damage, but as history. A handle polished smooth, where hands always land. A blade dulled just enough to be safe and familiar. Tools passed from one person to another carry lessons without instruction, and winter sharpens your respect for that inheritance. You pick up an object that has clearly lived before you. The balance feels slightly unusual at first, then settles into sense. A widely recognized fact, drawn from frontier family inventories, is that tools were rarely owned by individuals alone. They moved through households, across generations, accumulating small modifications along the way. Ownership mattered less than reliability. You turn the tool slowly, reading it like a map. A notch here marks a repair. A darker patch shows where oil soaked in over years. These marks are not flaws, they are guidance. They tell you how the tool prefers to be held, how much pressure it tolerates, where it might fail next if neglected. There's a quiet humility in using something shaped by another person's effort. You don't assume mastery immediately. You listen first. Historians still argue whether this culture of inherited tools encouraged conservatism or collective resilience. But the result is clear. People learn to adapt themselves to tools rather than forcing tools to adapt to them. You adjust your grip slightly, matching the wear pattern. Instantly, movement feels easier. Less resistance. This is knowledge transmitted through use, not words. Frontier skills often traveled this way, hand to hand, motion to motion. A quirky detail noted in some settlement letters describes families refusing to alter certain tools because they knew their work already. While that sounds poetic, scholars still debate whether such restraints preserved effectiveness or simply reflected superstition. Standing here, you understand the hesitation. Changing a familiar balance introduces uncertainty. Winter punishes uncertainty. You set the tool down carefully, respecting its place. Placement matters even more with shared tools. Everyone expects them where they were last used. Memory becomes communal. A missing tool disrupts more than one person's routine. You think about how this sharing shapes behavior. Care increases when replacement is difficult, and accountability is shared. A mainstream observation from frontier communities shows that communal tools were often better maintained than personal ones. Responsibility multiplied rather than diluted. You perform a small maintenance task before returning the tool. Wiping moisture, checking fastenings. This isn't required, it's courtesy. Courtesy here is practical, not polite. It ensures the next user begins with readiness rather than repair. As evening approaches, you notice how many objects around you carry similar histories. Nothing is pristine, nothing is neglected, everything exists in a state of ongoing usefulness. That continuity feels grounding. Historians still argue whether frontier cooperation was born from necessity or mutual trust. Watching tools move quietly between hands, the answer feels layered. Necessity began it, trust sustained it. You sit back and let that thought settle. Winter doesn't allow for isolation. Survival is cumulative. Tools remember what people forget, and people honor that memory through care. You rest easier, knowing that what you use tonight has already survived many nights like this, and that your own careful use will help it survive many more. Improvisation arrives quietly, usually disguised as inconvenience. A handle snaps when it shouldn't. A chord frays faster than expected. A tool slips from its place and vanishes into snow. None of this feels dramatic. It feels annoying. Winter thrives on annoyance because annoyance tempts haste. You pause instead of reacting. That pause is the real tool here. You scan what remains, scraps, offcuts, pieces saved without a clear purpose at the time. A broadly recognized reality from frontier material culture is that households kept far more odds and ends than modern sensibilities would tolerate, not hoarding anticipation. Broken things were not trash, they were future solutions waiting for the right problem. You pick up a length of bent wire, straighten it slowly against a board. It resists, then yields. Good. You test its strength with a gentle pull. Enough. Not perfect. Perfect is unnecessary. Sufficient carries you forward. You bind the broken handle, reinforcing stress points rather than restoring appearance. It looks crude. It works. That distinction matters. Frontier repairs often favoured function so aggressively that aesthetics barely entered the conversation. Historians still argue whether this stripped-down approach shaped long-term design philosophy or merely reflected harsh constraints, but Winter rewarded results, not elegance. You test the fix carefully. No sudden force, gradual pressure, the tool holds. That's all you need tonight. There's a quirky anecdote in some settlement letters describing people using leather scraps from worn-out boots to patch everything from buckets to belts. While scholars still debate how widespread this practice was, leather's durability made it an obvious candidate for improvisation. One object often lived several lives. You glance around the room with new eyes, everything becomes potential. Cloth can insulate, wood can wedge, ash can dry, snow can seal. Improvisation isn't creativity in the modern sense, it's recognition. You remember saving a small block of wood weeks ago without knowing why. Now it fits perfectly under a table leg that has begun to rock as the floor shifts with cold. You slide it in. The wobble disappears. That simple correction prevents spills noise and frustration tomorrow. A small win quietly earned. A mainstream understanding from frontier survival studies shows that people who adapted tools creatively experience fewer catastrophic failures than those who waited for proper replacements. Flexibility absorbed stress. Rigidity broke under it. You finish the adjustments and sit back, hands resting. There's a calm satisfaction in knowing you can respond when plans unravel. That confidence doesn't come from having everything. It comes from being able to use what's already there. Historians still debate whether improvisation skills were taught deliberately or developed unconsciously through repetition. Either way, Winter accelerated learning. Consequences arrived quickly enough to teach without explanation. You store the leftover scraps again, not neatly, but accessibly. You might need them tomorrow, or not. Either way, they've earned their place. As night settles, you feel lighter. Not because problems disappeared, but because your relationship with them changed. Shortages no longer feel like threats, they feel like prompts. You lie down knowing that if something fails overnight, you won't panic. You'll improvise. And in Winter, that quiet adaptability often matters more than any tool you own. Patience begins to feel like an object you carry, something with weight and texture, something you set down carefully when you don't need it and pick up again when you do. Winter teaches this without speeches. It teaches it through delay, through waiting, through the simple truth that forcing outcomes usually costs more than it saves. You feel this lesson most clearly when there is nothing urgent to do. The fire is steady, water is managed, tools are in their places. In warmer seasons, this would invite movement, improvement, expansion. In winter, it invites restraint. A widely acknowledged observation from frontier journals is that many winter accidents occurred during unnecessary activity. Projects started out of restlessness rather than need. You sit and allow the moment to remain unfinished. That choice feels active, not passive. It takes effort not to fill silence with motion. But you've learned that stillness conserves more than energy. It preserves judgment. Your mind wanders briefly toward tasks that could be done, wood that could be split, repairs that could be attempted. You let those thoughts pass without grabbing them. Tomorrow will offer light and slightly softer cold. Timing matters. Historians still argue whether frontier people consciously delayed tasks or simply responded intuitively to conditions, but the effect was the same. Work waited for advantage. You notice how your breathing slows when you commit to waiting. Muscles release their readiness. This isn't laziness, it's calibration. Bodies that stayed in constant readiness burned through reserves too quickly. There's a small curious detail recorded in some winter diaries, describing people sitting with tools in hand, without using them, knife resting across the palms cord, looped loosely around fingers. Scholars still debate whether this habit had practical purpose or psychological comfort, but holding tools without acting reinforced familiarity without risk. You pick up a length of cord now, turning it slowly, checking for wear, not repairing, just noticing. This quiet inspection keeps knowledge fresh without demanding effort. When action becomes necessary later, you'll already know where to begin. A mainstream understanding from frontier endurance accounts shows that those who survived long winters most consistently were not the strongest or fastest, but those who paced themselves across months rather than days. Endurance trumped intensity. Outside, the wind shifts, then settles. You feel the change but don't respond. Not every signal requires action. Learning which ones do is half the skill. The animals already told you enough earlier. Tonight doesn't need adjustment. You stretch gently, then stop before warmth tips into sweat. That boundary has become familiar now. You respect it without needing to think. Habit has replaced rule. Historians still debate whether this kind of seasonal restraint shaped frontier temperaments long term. Sitting here, calm and unhurried, the question feels less academic. The practice works. That's enough. You set the cord down and fold your hands loosely. Time passes without marking itself. The fire breathes, the house holds, nothing demands. Eventually you rise not because of impatience, but because rest has done its job. You move slowly, deliberately, conserving the ease you've gained. As you prepare for sleep, you realize something quietly important. Patience isn't waiting for winter to end. It's living comfortably inside it. You lie down with that understanding, letting the night stretch without resistance, confident that doing nothing right now is the most productive choice you could make. Community becomes visible in winter, not through gatherings, but through shared objects. You notice it when you reach for something, and remember it isn't yours alone. The shovel leaning by the door, the saw returned carefully to its hook, the large kettle resting where everyone knows to find it. These tools move quietly between households, stitching people together without ceremony. You carry one such item across packed snow steps, measured, breath steady. A broadly accepted historical understanding drawn from frontier settlement records is that many essential tools were owned communally, especially those expensive to replace or rarely used daily. Blacksmith tools, large saws, heavy kettles, sharing reduced individual burden and increased collective resilience. You knock once softly, then step inside without waiting for formal invitation. Winter shortened rituals. Warmth mattered more than etiquette. The tool changes hands with a nod. No ledger, no tracking. Memory does the accounting. Trust fills the gaps. There's a curious note in some regional correspondence describing how tools were sometimes marked with distinctive knots, carvings or bits of paint, not to claim ownership, but to signal responsibility. Scholars still debate whether these marks reduced loss or simply reinforced communal identity. But the practice appears often enough to suggest it mattered. You stay only briefly. Lingering costs heat, visits in winter are purposeful, exchange happens efficiently. A few words, a quick update on weather animal stores. Information flows alongside tools, both are valuable. As you walk back, you think about how sharing changes behavior. You handle the tool more carefully than if it were yours alone. You clean it thoroughly before returning it. A mainstream observation from frontier community studies shows that shared equipment often lasted longer than privately owned equivalents because responsibility multiplied rather than diluted. You pause to clear snow from the blade before reaching home. Wet metal rusts overnight. Rust spreads silently. You won't pass that problem along. Courtesy here is preventative maintenance. Inside the tool does its work easily. It's heavier than what you're used to, but more capable. You adjust your movements to suit it. Adaptation goes both ways. The job finishes faster, cleaner. You feel grateful, not emotionally, but practically. There's an odd anecdote recorded in one settlement about a communal plough that travelled between farms each winter, accompanied by shared meals at every stop. While scholars still debate how widespread such rituals were, the story reveals something true. Tools created reasons to gather without forcing celebration. You clean the tool again before returning it, hands numb but deliberate. Returning something in better condition than you received it was unspoken rule. Winter enforced that ethic. Breaking it had consequences. As night settles, you feel less alone than you did in warmer seasons. not because people are closer physically, but because systems overlap. Your survival touches theirs, their preparedness touches yours. Historians still argue whether frontier communities were bound more by necessity or mutual care. Carrying a shared tool through the snow, the distinction feels unnecessary. The bond functions either way. You set the borrowed item back where it belongs and step away confident it will be there when needed again. That confidence lightens the mind. You rest knowing that winter is not faced alone, even on the quietest nights. Tools travel, knowledge travels, help moves without announcement, and in that steady exchange, survival becomes a shared accomplishment rather than an individual test. Spring exists long before it arrives. You feel it in the way you prepare, not in the way the land looks. Outside, winter still holds its ground. Snow remains packed. Cold lingers in the shade. But your hands begin doing things that belong to later months, quietly, without announcing hope. You take out tools that haven't been touched in weeks. Not to use them yet, just to inspect. A hoe leaning in the corner. A spade resting where frost cannot reach it. You wipe dust away and check metal for rust. A widely recognized historical pattern from frontier seasonal routines shows that people prepared for spring during winter lulls not out of optimism, but strategy, waiting until thaw wasted valuable daylight. You don't sharpen aggressively, just enough to keep edges honest. Over-sharpening invites chipping when frozen soil resists. You stop when the metal feels ready, not perfect. Perfection belongs to milder seasons. You repair handles now when time allows patience. Wood swells differently in cold. Fixes made now settle by spring. This timing appears often in settlement records, though rarely explained outright. People learned when materials behaved best. There's a small ritual to this work. You imagine soil that isn't yet reachable. You picture planting that hasn't begun. This isn't daydreaming, it's orientation. Scholars still debate whether mental rehearsal improved frontier outcomes, but envisioning future tasks kept people aligned with seasonal flow, rather than trapped in present hardship. You store seeds carefully, checking dryness again. They sleep now. They must stay that way. Moisture wakes them too early. A mainstream understanding from agricultural journals of the era notes that premature germination during winter ruined many early harvests. Patience extended beyond people to plants. You reorganize storage, slightly moving spring tools closer, winter ones a bit farther back. This physical shift mirrors mental transition. Winter is still here, but it no longer defines every decision. Preparation softens its hold. A quirky anecdote from some homesteads describes families carving notches into tool handles to mark winters survived before spring planting. Scholars still debate whether this was widespread or symbolic, but the impulse makes sense. Tools witnessed seasons the way people did. You sit briefly and rest, letting the idea of change settle without excitement. Excitement burns energy. Energy must be saved. Spring will demand plenty when it arrives. Historians still argue whether frontier people experienced hope differently than modern ones. Sitting here, the feeling is quieter than hope. It's expectation grounded in routine. You don't wish winter away. You prepare for what comes next. As evening falls, you return tools to their places satisfied. Nothing has changed outside. Inside, something has. You lie down knowing that winter has been endured, not by waiting it out, but by moving steadily toward what follows. And that movement, slow, deliberate, patient, makes the cold feel less final. Simplicity stops feeling like limitation and starts feeling like mastery. You recognize it in the way your hands move without asking permission, in the way tools seem to appear exactly where you expect them to be. Nothing here feels improvised anymore, even though almost everything once was. You wake and move through the space, calmly aware of how little you actually need. A widely accepted historical conclusion drawn from frontier survival studies is that long-term winter survival depended less on specialized equipment and more on deep familiarity with a small set of reliable tools. Mastery replaced abundance. Knowing mattered more than owning. You lift the knife, the bucket, the shovel, the lantern, each one briefly, almost ceremonially. Not to use them, just to acknowledge them. They have shaped your days, structured your nights, and taught you how to think. Tools here are not accessories, they are habits made solid. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this realization. Not pride, confidence. You no longer rush to solve problems. You recognize patterns before they escalate. Cold feels less like a threat and more like a condition that requires certain responses. A quirky but revealing detail found in some late frontier memoirs describes settlers feeling uneasy when presented with new tools, even superior ones. Scholars still debate whether this resistance slowed innovation or protected survival, but the discomfort came from losing familiarity, not rejecting improvement. Familiar tools had already proven themselves under pressure. You understand that now. Each simple object around you carries accumulated trust. You know its limits, you know its strengths. That knowledge removes guesswork. Guesswork wastes energy. You sit and listen for a while, letting the room exist without interference. The fire holds, the walls hold, your body holds, everything is working within known boundaries. That predictability is deeply calming. Historians still argue whether frontier resilience was born of necessity or cultivated deliberately. Sitting here surrounded by tools worn smooth through repetition, the answer feels layered. Necessity introduced the lesson. Repetition turned it into skill. You stretch gently and feel no urgency to do more. Winter no longer feels like something to endure. It feels like something you understand. Understanding reduces fear more effectively than force ever could. As the day moves quietly toward evening, you realize that the tools didn't just help you survive the season. They reshaped how you approach effort, time, and attention. They taught you to work with conditions rather than against them. That lesson will follow you long after winter loosens its grip. You prepare for rest without hurry. Everything is already where it should be. That's the real victory. Not abundance, not conquest, just readiness. You lie back, letting the final warmth of the day settle, aware that you have crossed an invisible threshold. Winter no longer defines you. It has instructed you. And now slowly, gently, the story begins to soften. The fire lowers its voice until it is barely a presence at all. Outside, the cold continues, its patient work reshaping the world, inch by inch, grain by grain. Inside, you are no longer measuring it. Your breathing lengthens, your muscles loosen. The tools that once demanded attention now rest content, silent. You let your thoughts drift without direction. There is nothing left to plan tonight, nothing left to prepare. The season will do what it does. You will respond when needed. That trust settles deep in the body, heavier than blankets, warmer than flame. The room grows smaller in the best possible way. Edges soften, sounds blur. The weight of effort slips off your shoulders and stays off. You are not alert now. You are not guarding anything. You are simply present then, slowly, not even that. If a thought appears, you let it pass like breath in cold air, visible for a moment, then gone. The tools have done their work. You have done yours. The night holds you gently, and you let it, sweet dreams.